Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for years, and I guess it's time to get it out there. My name's Shannon Morgan, and I've lived alone on this 80-acre property for more than 25 years now. It's mostly forest and pasture, with a deep ravine cutting through the back that's full of caves and thick brush. For a long time, it was just me and the quiet, the kind of peace where you can hear your own thoughts without any interference. But 8 years ago, that all started to change, and there's one day in particular that still haunts me. The day everything went from weird to downright terrifying. It was a cool, overcast morning in late fall, the kind where the sky looks like it's made of slate and the air has that damp chill that seeps into your bones. I'd been waking up tense for months by then, ever since the barn cats started disappearing and I'd find their mangled remains scattered around. Then came the rocks. Fist-sized ones hurled at my barn, my truck, even the house, hitting with enough force to shake the walls. I'd seen a shadowy figure slip into the trees once after a rock hit, so I knew it wasn't some kid or a bear. But this day, it felt different right from the start. I woke up to this series of loud, metallic bangs, like someone was taking a sledgehammer to something outside. It wasn't just one or two. It was a rapid succession, boom, 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 so violent that the whole house seemed to vibrate. My heart jumped into my throat, and I sat straight up in bed, my ears ringing. For a second, I just froze, listening. The silence after was almost worse, thick and heavy, like the calm before a storm. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and too loud in the quiet. I swung my legs out of bed, my feet hitting the cold wooden floor, and grabbed the shotgun I keep leaned against the wall. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it steady. I crept to the window, peeling back the curtain just enough to peer out. The motion light on the barn was out, again, and in the dim morning light I could see something was wrong. The aluminum ladder I usually keep propped against the barn was lying on the ground, but it wasn't just fallen, it was twisted, like someone had taken it and wrung it like a towel. The siding on the barn was torn too, long gashes in the wood that looked like claw marks. My stomach dropped. I'd seen footprints before, huge ones, 18 inches long near the garden, and muddy handprints way up high on the siding. But this was new. This was destructive in a way that felt personal, like a warning. I pulled on my boots and a jacket, my movements slow and careful, like if I made too much noise, whatever was out there would hear me. The door creaked when I opened it, and I flinched, stepping out onto the porch. The air smelled rank, like wet dog, and something else, something rotten. It's a smell I'd come to recognize over the years, and it always made the hair on my arms stand up. I scanned the tree line, my eyes straining in the grey light. Nothing moved, but I could feel eyes on me, that prickling sensation on the back of my neck that tells you you're not alone. I walked toward the barn, my boots crunching on the gravel, each step feeling too loud. The twisted ladder was even worse up close. The metal was bent in ways that didn't seem possible without tools. How do you twist aluminum like that with bare hands, unless they weren't hands at all? I remember my breath fogging in the air, and I was shivering, but not just from the cold. Fear had a tight grip on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I checked the barn door. It was intact, but the ground around it was a mess of footprints. Big ones, overlapping, like there'd been more than one of them. I'd figured out by then that there were multiple, a dominant one nearly 10 feet tall from the tracks, and others smaller, around 7 feet or so, and a couple lighter framed ones about 6 to 6.5 feet. Seeing their prints all mixed together like that sent a chill down my spine. They'd been working together. Then I remembered the calf. I had a young one in the pasture, and my first thought was to check on it. I hurried around the side of the barn, my heart pounding, and sure enough, the gate was open and the calf was gone. No sign of struggle, just gone. The pasture grass was trampled in spots leading toward the ravine. I followed the trail, my shotgun held tight, every sense on high alert. The ravine's always been a spooky place, dark, dense with trees, and those caves that seem to go on forever. I'd avoided it as much as I could since the encounters started, but now I had to go down there. The path was muddy from recent rains, and I could see more footprints, deep impressions that sank into the earth. They were fresh, the edges still sharp. As I got closer to the ravine, the smell got stronger, that same foul odor mixed with the dampness of decay. My hands were sweaty on the gun, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something moving in the trees. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, just an eerie stillness. When I reached the edge of the ravine, I saw it, the calf's hide, stretched out on the ground near one of the cave entrances. It was ripped open, mostly intact but empty, like something had cleaned it out in one piece. The sight made my stomach turn. I'd found remains before, but this was different. It was placed there almost deliberately. As I stood there, staring, I heard a low growl from deep in the trees. It wasn't like any animal I know. Deeper, guttural, with a resonance that vibrated in my chest. I froze, my blood running cold. I backed away slowly, not wanting to turn my back on the ravine. My mind was racing with all the things that had happened over the years. The rocks thrown, the footsteps on my porch, the time I was working on my tractor and caught one watching me from the tree line before it vanished, leaving that rank smell behind. I'd started leaving food out eventually, apples, corn, and that had calmed things down some, but on this day, it felt like all that progress had been wiped away. This was aggression, pure and simple. As I retreated, I noticed something else. A pile of smooth river rocks on my porch, like the ones they'd left before, but this time they were scattered, as if thrown in anger. It hit me then that this might have been a response to something I did or didn't do. Maybe I'd missed a food offering or gotten too close to the ravine. The uncertainty was part of the terror. I never knew what would set them off. I made it back to the house, my legs feeling like jelly. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. The whole place felt exposed, like the walls couldn't protect me. I spent the rest of the day jumpy, every creak of the house making me flinch. I kept peering out the windows, but I didn't see anything move. The silence stretched on, heavy and ominous. By evening, the fear had settled into a dull ache in my gut. I knew they were still out there, watching. I'd heard splashing in the ravine before, and once a relative visiting had fled after a roar and cracking sounds, so I knew they were aware of me too. But on that day, it felt like a line had been crossed. The twisted ladder, the torn siding, the calf. It was all too much. As night fell, I sat in my kitchen with the lights off, just listening. The wind picked up, rustling the trees, and every now and then I'd hear a branch snap or something shift in the darkness. My mind kept replaying the events, the sounds, the smells. I thought about how, in the years after, I learned to coexist in an uneasy peace, leaving food, avoiding the ravine, respecting their space. But that day, there was no peace. There was only the raw, gut-wrenching fear that something powerful and unknown was right outside, and I was completely at its mercy. I must have fallen asleep at the table because I woke up to the first light of dawn, stiff and cold. Nothing else had happened that night, but the memory of that day has stuck with me ever since. I never found out why they escalated things then, or what they wanted. Even now, years later, I'll sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, hearing echoes of those bangs, and I'll lie there waiting, wondering if they're still out there, and if one misstep could bring it all back. The not knowing is the worst part. I can't explain it, and I doubt I ever will. Story 2. All right, so I've never told this to anyone except my wife, and even then, I don't think she really gets it. I'm writing this down because it's been eating at me for years now, and I figure if anyone might understand, it's people here. I'm not a writer, so I'm just gonna tell it like it happened. It's gonna be long, because every damn detail is burned into my brain. It was Wednesday, August 12th, 2015. I remember the date because it was my dad's birthday, and I was driving back from a quick trip to the hardware store in the next town over to pick up some stuff to fix our fence. I was on DuPont Road, which is this quiet two-lane stretch out in Illinois, surrounded by cornfields and patches of woods. It's not a road you take if you're in a hurry. It's got some curves, and it cuts through farmland and little pockets of forest before it runs near the river. I've driven it 1,000 times. It's usually just me and the occasional tractor. The time was about 11:20 in the morning. I know because I'd looked at the clock in my truck right before it happened, thinking I'd be home in time for lunch. The sun was high and bright, no clouds, one of those clear summer days where everything feels sharp and real. I had my window down, and the air coming in was warm and smelled like cut grass and dry earth. I was just cruising along, not really thinking about much, just the fence and what I was going to have for lunch. My truck's an old Ford, and it rattles a bit, but it runs fine. The radio was on low, some classic rock station, but I wasn't really listening. I was coming around a gentle bend, where the woods on the left get a bit thicker, a tangle of oaks and underbrush that runs right up to the edge of the asphalt. The field on the right was fallow, just weeds, and then more trees sloping down toward the river, which you can't see from the road, but you know it's there. I was probably doing about 45, just under the speed limit, and then something came out of the trees on my left. My brain didn't process it at first. It was just a movement, a big dark shape bursting from the shadows of the tree line. I took my foot off the gas instinctively, my hands tightening on the wheel. I remember a stupid, fleeting thought. Deer. But it was too big and it was standing up. It came out onto the road in 2, maybe 3 steps. Its gait was, it's hard to describe. It wasn't running. It was this long, powerful, swinging stride. Each step covered so much ground. It was upright, like a man, but it wasn't a man. It was huge. I'd guess it cleared both lanes of the road, from the left shoulder to the right, in less than 3 seconds. I was probably only 50, 60 feet away when it stepped onto the pavement. I slowed down more, my truck crawling now, maybe doing 20. I was just staring, my brain scrambling to put a name to what I was seeing. I remember my mouth was open. I think I muttered, "What the hell is that?" Out loud, to nobody. It was just a reflex, a stupid question thrown into the empty cab of my truck. The sun was directly on it. There was no shadow, no trick of the light. It was solid. It had this fur, a thick coat. It wasn't shaggy like a bear's, not long and flowing. It was more like a medium-length, really dense fur, kind of rough-looking, like on a wild boar. The color was a mix, a dirty gray with patches of a lighter tan, almost a creamy color on its back and shoulders. The sun hit the tan parts and made them look lighter. It never looked at me. Its head was forward, facing the direction it was going, toward the trees on the right. I didn't see its face clearly. It was just a dark shape under the bulk of its shoulders. Its arms were long, and they swung with its steps, powerful looking. The whole thing was just muscle and purpose. It moved like it had somewhere to be, and nothing was going to stop it. Then it was gone. It reached the far shoulder of the road and just melted into the wall of weeds and saplings. It didn't crash through the brush, it just vanished into it. 1 second it was there, a massive solid thing in the bright sun, and the next, the space where it had been, was empty. The weeds on the edge of the road swayed a little where it had passed through. My truck was still rolling. I hadn't come to a complete stop, I just kept driving. My heart was starting to thump in my chest, a slow, heavy beat that felt like it was shaking my whole body. I drove past the spot where it had crossed. I looked to my right, into the thicket, but I couldn't see anything, just green leaves and shadows. For a few hundred yards, I just drove, my mind completely blank. Then this cold feeling started in my gut and spread outwards. My hands were sweaty on the steering wheel. I glanced in my rearview mirror, but the road behind me was empty. What had I just seen? I started talking to myself again, my voice shaky. A bear? Was it a bear? But it wasn't walking like a bear. Bears on their hind legs are clumsy, they waddle. This thing moved with a smooth, powerful grace, and the fur was wrong, and it was too tall. I'm 6 feet tall, and from my perspective in the truck, this thing had to be at least 7, maybe 7.5 feet tall. It was broad too, massive across the chest and shoulders. A person in a suit? That thought was even dumber. Who would be wearing a full-body fur suit in the middle of an Illinois summer, in the middle of nowhere, and sprint across a road with that kind of raw animal power? It made no sense. The practical part of my brain, the part that fixes fences and pays taxes, was fighting a losing battle. I'd seen what I'd seen. The image was seared into my eyes, the way the sunlight glinted off that rough, grizzled fur, the sheer mass of it, the sound or the lack of sound. It hadn't made a noise, no grunt, no snap of twigs, just that silent, devastatingly efficient movement. I drove all the way home on autopilot. I pulled into my driveway and just sat there in the truck for a few minutes, the engine off. The normal sounds of my neighborhood, a dog barking, a lawnmower in the distance, felt alien and wrong. The world had just shifted on its axis, and nobody else knew it. I went inside. My wife was in the kitchen. She asked if I got the brackets for the fence. I just nodded. I couldn't form words. I felt like if I started talking, I'd either scream or start crying. I put the hardware bag on the counter and went to the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked pale, my eyes were wide, I looked scared. I was scared. Not of the thing itself, not anymore, but of what its existence meant. My whole life, I'd dismissed stories about Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever you want to call it as nonsense, the domain of gullible people and bad TV shows. I was a skeptic, and in one 10-second glimpse on a sunny road, that skepticism had been shattered. The rest of the day is a blur. I tried to eat lunch, but couldn't. I tried to work on the fence, but my hands were unsteady. All I could think about was that spot on DuPont Road. The need to go back, to look for something, anything, became an itch under my skin. I had to know I wasn't going crazy. Later that afternoon, I told my wife I forgot something in town and had to go back. It was a weak excuse, but she just shrugged. I got back in my truck and drove to DuPont Road. My heart was pounding again as I approached the bend. It looked so ordinary, just a road, trees, weeds. I pulled over onto the narrow shoulder on the right-hand side, right about where I'd seen it disappear. I turned the engine off. The silence was heavy. It was still sunny, but the heat of the day was starting to soften. Crickets were chirping in the fields. I got out of the truck. The air felt different here now, charged. I walked to the edge of the road where it had vanished. The ground was dry and packed, covered in a layer of dust and gravel from the road. I peered into the brush. It was thick, thorny bushes, young trees, tall weeds. I saw it almost immediately. A path. It wasn't a clean trail, but a clear line where the weeds and some of the smaller saplings had been pushed aside, crushed down. They weren't broken, not snapped in half, but bent and flattened, as if something very heavy and very wide had shouldered its way through. The path led straight back, descending the slope towards the river. A part of me, the stupid part, wanted to follow it, but a much larger, primal part of me screamed, no. The thought of walking into that shadowy thicket, following the trail of that thing, filled me with a cold, simple terror. This wasn't a curiosity anymore. It was a threat. I stood there at the edge, my feet rooted to the gravel shoulder. I looked down at the ground, searching for a footprint. That's what you're supposed to look for, right? A print. but the ground right at the road's edge was bone dry and hard. There were no clear impressions, nothing but some scuff marks in the dust. Maybe if it had been muddy, there would have been something. A castable print, proof. But there was nothing. Just those crushed plants, already starting to slowly spring back up. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, just staring into the woods. The river was down there. I could hear the faint murmur of it now that I was listening. It would have water, softer ground. Maybe there were prints down there, but I couldn't make myself go. The fear was too physical. It was a tightness in my chest, a feeling of being watched, even though I was completely alone on the road. That was the moment the real terror hit me. It wasn't the sight of the creature. That was shock and confusion. This was worse. This was the aftermath. This was the realization that something that was not supposed to exist did. That it lived here, in these woods I'd driven past my whole life. That it was real and powerful and completely unknown, and I had nothing to show for it. No photo, no footprint, no story anyone would believe. Just a memory that felt too vivid to be a dream and too impossible to be real. I got back in my truck, my hands shaking so bad I had trouble getting the key in the ignition. I drove home and I didn't look back. I never went back to that spot. I take a different route now, if I have to go that way. I finished the fence. Life went on, but nothing has ever felt quite the same. I see the woods differently now. I hear a noise out back at night, and I freeze. That thing, whatever it was, it broke the world for me. It showed me that the map of what's real and what's not has blank spaces, big ones, and something lives in those spaces. And sometimes, on a quiet Wednesday morning in August, it decides to cross the road. Story 3. Okay, I'll try to write this out like I'm just posting it online, still shaken up by it all. Here goes nothing. So, this happened to me about 2 years ago, in the spring. My husband and I decided to go mushroom hunting. We do it every year when the weather gets warm, but before it gets too hot. It's kind of our thing. Just a way to get outside, you know? That day, we drove out to western Indiana near Big Walnut Creek. It was one of those mild afternoons where the sun is out but it's not too bright, and there's just enough of a breeze to keep the bugs down. We parked the truck off this little dirt pull-off near the creek, grabbed our baskets and our pocket knives, and headed into the woods. We've been to this spot before. It's not too far from the main road, but once you're in there, it feels isolated. The trees are thick, and the ground is soft from all the leaves and pine needles. You can hear the creek bubbling nearby and sometimes birds chirping, but that's about it. We usually stick together, but that day we figured we'd cover more ground if we split up. He went one way along the creek, and I went the other. We agreed to meet back at the truck in about an hour if we didn't find much. I started walking, keeping my eyes on the ground, looking for morels. They're these little mushrooms that pop up in the spring, and they're kind of hard to spot if you don't know what you're looking for. At first, everything seemed normal. The air smelled damp and earthy, like it always does after the snow melts. I was wearing my old jeans and a hoodie, and I had my hair tied back. I remember feeling pretty relaxed, just focused on finding some mushrooms for dinner. But after about half an hour, I started noticing something weird. Most of the spots where I usually find mushrooms had been disturbed. Not like animals had dug them up, more like someone had been there before me and cut the stems clean off. I've seen deer and raccoons mess with mushrooms, but they don't leave clean cuts. This looked like someone had used a knife. I figured maybe other hunters had been through earlier in the day. It happens sometimes, especially in popular spots. I didn't think much of it at first. Just felt a little disappointed. I kept going, hoping to find at least a few that were missed. The further I walked, the quieter it got. The creek was still gurgling, but the birds had stopped chirping. I didn't really notice it at the time, but looking back it was too quiet, like the woods were holding their breath. I remember feeling a little uneasy, but I brushed it off. I'm not usually jumpy in the woods. I've been hiking and camping my whole life, but something felt off. I was about to turn back and head to the truck when I spotted a small mushroom near a fallen log. It was tucked right up against the bark, kind of hidden. I felt a little rush of excitement. Finally, one they missed. I bent down to pick it, my fingers brushing against the cool, damp soil. And that's when I heard it. Deep, steady breathing, close by. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Like someone was standing right behind me. I froze. My whole body went stiff. I didn't move, didn't even breathe for a second. Then, slowly, I looked up. About 50 feet away, there was this tall, broad figure standing between two trees. At first, I thought it was a man, maybe another hunter or someone out hiking, but then I realized it was covered in hair, dark brown or blackish hair, thick and matted. Its face was partially shadowed, but I could see enough to know it wasn't human. The proportions were wrong. The shoulders were too wide, the arms too long. It just stood there, perfectly still, staring right at me. I felt so small, exposed, like I was a bug under a magnifying glass. My heart started hammering in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I just stayed there, crouched on the ground, staring back. Then I remembered my husband. He was about 100 yards away, down by the creek. I turned my head slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, and looked in his direction. I couldn't see him through the trees, but I knew he was there. When I looked back at the figure, it had moved. It wasn't standing in the same spot anymore. It had shifted behind a thick tree trunk, so only part of its shoulder was visible, like it was hiding, but still watching me. That's when the real terror hit me. It wasn't just some animal. It was intelligent enough to hide, to watch me without being seen. I finally found my voice and shouted for my husband. It came out as a strangled cry, not loud but enough. Then I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran towards the truck, my basket dropping somewhere behind me. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud, and the sound of my feet pounding on the ground. Branches scraped against my arms and face. But I didn't care. I just kept running. My heart was beating so fast I thought it would burst. My legs felt weak, like they might give out any second. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I kept expecting to hear something behind me, footsteps, growling, anything. But it was dead silent, except for the sound of me crashing through the underbrush. When I finally reached the truck, I was shaking so bad I could barely stand. I leaned against the door, gasping for air, my whole body trembling. I fumbled for the keys in my pocket, but my hands were shaking too much to get a grip. I just stood there, trying to catch my breath, waiting for my husband. He showed up a few minutes later, looking confused. He asked me what was wrong, why I was so pale. I told him what I saw, my words tumbling out in a rush. I described the figure, the breathing, the way it hid behind the tree. He listened, his expression going from confused to serious. Then he told me something that made my blood run cold. He said that while he was looking for mushrooms, he heard footsteps nearby. He thought it was me, so he didn't think much of it. But then he heard mumbling sounds, like someone talking under their breath. He said it didn't sound like me, but he figured that maybe I was just muttering to myself. Now he realized it wasn't me at all. We didn't call the police. What would we say? That we saw a big hairy thing in the woods. They'd think we were crazy. We just got in the truck and drove home, not saying much. I spent the whole ride staring out the window, watching the trees blur past, feeling like I'd left part of myself back in those woods. I've never gone back there alone. I don't even like driving near that area now. Sometimes, when I'm trying to fall asleep, I'll remember that feeling of being watched, and I'll get chills all over again. It's not like in the movies where things jump out and scream. It was worse. The stillness, the silence, the knowing that something was there, and it was watching me. I still don't know what it was. Maybe it was a bear, but bears don't stand on two legs like that, and they don't hide behind trees. Maybe it was someone in a costume, but out there, why? It doesn't make sense. All I know is that in that moment, when I looked up and saw it staring at me, I felt a fear so deep and primal that it's stuck with me ever since. And sometimes, when I'm out in the woods now, I'll catch myself stopping, listening, wondering if I'm being watched again. Story 4. All right, I'll just get this out. I've been sitting on it for a while now, and I guess typing it out might help. Or maybe it'll just make me feel crazy all over again. I don't know. But it happened. I was there. It was one of those crisp, clear mornings in early October. The kind where the air smells like pine and cold dirt, and your breath comes out in little clouds. The sun was just starting to hit the tops of the firs. But down in the valley where my property is, it was still all shadows and chill. I'd been up since before first light because one of my older heifers had gone down during the night. Found her out in the north pasture, just stiff and cold. It happens. It's part of ranching. It's a sad, crummy part of the job, but it's part of it. You don't get sentimental. You just deal with the problem. So I hooked the old flatbed trailer to my tractor. It's a John Deere 5E series, green and yellow, a real workhorse. And I drove it out to where she was lying. Getting a full-grown cow onto a trailer by yourself is a hell of a job. It's all grunting and leverage, using a come-along and a lot of muttered curses. My back was already complaining by the time I had her strapped down. The plan was simple: haul her up the old logging road that cuts up the backside of the mountain on my property. There's a spot about a mile up, a steep bluff overlooking a ravine where I've buried a few others over the years. It's out of the way, and the soil is soft enough to dig a decent hole without breaking your spirit. The tractor isn't fast. It putters along, and the trailer bumps and sways behind it. The logging road is just 2 ruts carved into the earth, overgrown with ferns and young alders in the middle. The trees crowd in on both sides, so thick in places, it's like driving through a green tunnel. That morning it was dead quiet, no birds, no wind rustling the leaves, just the chugging of the diesel engine and the creak of the trailer. The silence itself felt heavy, like a weight pressing down. That's when I first felt it. This prickle on the back of my neck, a feeling like I was being watched. You know that feeling? You're out in the woods by yourself, and suddenly your skin just knows there are eyes on you. Your instincts kick in, the old parts of your brain that we mostly don't need anymore. I shrugged it off at first, told myself it was just the creepiness of hauling a dead animal up a lonely mountain road. But the feeling didn't go away. It got stronger. My shoulders got tight. I found myself looking into the trees, scanning the shadows between the trunks, but I didn't see anything, just darkness and more trees. I was probably about 3/4 of the way up to the bluff, navigating a particularly rough patch where the road dips into a small creek crossing when it happened. A rock, about the size of a golf ball, maybe a little bigger, came sailing out of the woods on my left. It didn't just fall, it was thrown. It landed with a hard thwack in the mud about 5 feet in front of the tractor's front tire. I jerked, my hands clenching on the steering wheel. My heart did this stupid little jump in my chest. I slammed on the brake, and the tractor lurched to a halt. I sat there, engine still rumbling, and just stared at that rock. It was just sitting there in the middle of the rut. It was a normal river rock, grey and smooth. I looked to the left, into the wall of salal and young cedars. Nothing. Complete stillness. My mind raced through the possibilities. Kids? There are no kids for miles around. Another hunter? But it was the wrong time of day. And who the hell throws a rock at a tractor? It made no sense. A sick, cold knot started to form in my stomach. This wasn't right. I took a deep breath, told myself to get a grip and put the tractor back in gear. I drove maybe another 50 yards, the feeling of being watched now so intense, it was like a physical pressure. I was sweating even though the air was cold, and then the second rock came. This one didn't land near me. It hit me. It came from the same side, whistling through the air so fast I didn't even have time to flinch. It smacked into the meaty part of my left shoulder, right near the collarbone. The pain was instant and sharp, a deep bruising impact that made me yell out. It wasn't enough to break bone, but it hurt like hell and it scared the life out of me. That was no accident. That was a shot. I jammed the brake again, my whole body vibrating with adrenaline. I was panting. I turned, my hand going to my throbbing shoulder, and I looked back into the woods. And that's when I saw it. About 30 yards away, standing just at the edge of the tree line, was this figure. My first thought, my brain trying to make sense of it, was that it was a very tall, very broad man, wearing some kind of shaggy, reddish-brown coat. It was standing perfectly upright, its arms hanging at its sides. But in the half-second it took for my eyes to focus, the pieces didn't add up. The proportions were all wrong. The shoulders were too wide, the arms too long, hanging down past its knees. It was massive. I mean, it made the 6-foot furs next to it look small, and it was covered head to toe in this hair or fur that was a rusty, reddish color, like old cedar bark. It wasn't a man. The understanding didn't dawn on me slowly. It hit me all at once, a cold, horrifying wave of certainty that washed away any other explanation. This was something else. Our eyes met. I can't even describe its face. It was mostly dark, shadowed under a heavy brow, but I saw enough. I saw intelligence there, and I saw pure, undiluted hostility. It wasn't just looking at me, it was looking at me. It felt like a challenge, a warning. The air just went out of me. My blood went cold. I didn't think. There was no thought. There was only a primal, screaming command in my head. Run! I threw the tractor into reverse, yanking the wheel, trying to turn the whole rig around on the narrow road. It was a clumsy, panicked maneuver, the trailer jackknifed, the wheels skidding in the mud. I wasn't breathing right. I was just gasping. I got it pointed back down the mountain, and I shoved the throttle all the way forward. The tractor surged, engine roaring, bouncing violently down the rutted track. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I just stared ahead, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white. The road snakes down the mountain. There's a long, straight section, then a sharp hairpin turn to the left, then another stretch, then another turn. I was flying down the straight section, the tractor feeling like it was going to shake apart, ferns and branches whipping at the sides. As I approached the first sharp bend, I glanced ahead, down into the trees where the road would disappear, and I saw it. The creature. It was already there. It was standing off to the right side of the road, right where the bend started, just watching me come. It hadn't run down the road. It had gone through the woods. The slope there is almost vertical, a tangled mess of fallen logs, blackberry thickets, and devil's club. Nothing, and I mean nothing, could move through that fast. It was impossible. But it was there. It had cut me off. A sound came out of me, a kind of choked whimper. I took the turn way too fast, the trailer fishtailing wildly behind me. I didn't look at it as I passed, but I felt it. I felt its eyes on me. The terror was absolute now. It was a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. My whole body was trembling. I gunned it down the next straight section, the engine screaming. The road dipped and rose. I came to the next turn, another sharp one. And there it was again. Further down, maybe 40 yards ahead, just stepping out of the trees onto the road. It stopped and turned to face me. It was just standing there, blocking my path. It was toying with me, showing me it could be anywhere it wanted, any time it wanted. I slammed on the brakes, skidded to a stop, and then reversed again, finding a slightly wider spot in the road to turn around. I had no plan now. I was just an animal in a trap. I started heading back up the mountain, away from it, my mind blank with panic. I didn't know where I was going. I just had to move. I drove maybe 200 yards back up the road, my heart hammering against my ribs. I risked a look in the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. I slowed, my breath coming in ragged sobs. Maybe I'd lost it, maybe it was gone, and then I saw movement to my left. I turned my head. It was keeping pace with me, moving through the trees parallel to the road. It wasn't running, it was just walking, this powerful, effortless stride. Its long arms swinging, it was keeping up with the tractor without even trying. It glanced over at me, and then it melted back into the deeper shadows and was gone. I didn't stop. I drove all the way back to the spot where I'd first seen it, took the turn, and then drove like a madman all the way down to my ranch yard. I didn't see it again on the way down. I burst out of the tree line and into the open field near my barn, and I didn't stop until I'd driven the tractor and trailer right into the equipment shed. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. I just sat there in the driver's seat, shaking uncontrollably. I could smell my own sweat, sharp and sour. The spot on my shoulder where the rock had hit was a deep, angry purple bruise already forming. I sat there for a long time, maybe 20 minutes, just trying to get my breathing under control. The dead cow was still on the trailer. I didn't care. I left it there. The rest of the day was a blur. I went inside my house. It was empty. My wife was at work in town. I locked the door, which I never do during the day. I sat at the kitchen table with a rifle next to me, jumping at every little sound. The normal sounds of the house, the fridge kicking on, the floorboards settling, made me flinch. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. The world outside my windows, the land I'd worked for 15 years, suddenly felt alien and hostile. Evening came on. The sky turned from blue to orange to a deep twilight purple. I had the outside lights on, casting long, strange shadows across the yard. I was in the living room, trying to watch TV and failing, when my two dogs, a pair of blue heelers who are normally fearless, started going nuts. They were at the back door, barking their heads off, not their usual "someone's here" bark, but a high-pitched, frantic, scared bark. The hair on their backs was standing straight up. I grabbed the rifle and went to the door. "What is it?" I said, my voice tight. "What's out there?" I opened the door, and the dogs shot out into the yard, still barking hysterically. They ran maybe 20 yards towards the tree line at the edge of the pasture, and then they just stopped. They both skidded to a halt, their barks cutting off into low, terrified whines. They tucked their tails between their legs and ran back towards the house, scrambling past me and into the kitchen, where they hid under the table. My blood went cold again. I stood in the doorway, the rifle held tight, and I looked out into the growing dark. And I saw it. It was standing at the edge of the pasture, right where the grass meets the woods, 50 yards away. It was just standing there, silhouetted against the darkening trees. It was so much bigger than I remembered. It was huge. It was just watching the house, watching me. I didn't raise the rifle. I didn't move. I was frozen. We just stood there, looking at each other across that 50 yards of empty pasture. The message was clear. It wasn't just on the mountain. It was here, on my land. It knew where I lived. I don't know how long we stood like that. It felt like an hour. It was probably only a minute. Then, without a sound, it turned. It didn't run, it just walked, with that same powerful, deliberate stride into the trees and was gone. It just vanished into the darkness. I stood there for a long time after, just staring at the spot where it had been. The night sounds slowly returned, crickets, an owl in the distance, but the normalcy was a lie. Everything had changed. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat in the dark. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't tell my wife when she got home. I didn't tell anyone for weeks. How do you even start that conversation? What do you say? I still feel that rock hitting my shoulder. I still see its eyes. I know what I saw, and I know it's still out there. Story 5. I'll never forget that day, not ever. It's burned into my brain like a brand, and even now, decades later, I can close my eyes and be right back there, feeling that cold dread seep into my bones. I was 14 years old, living on my grandpa's farm way up in northern Minnesota. This was back in the 1960s, when life moved slower, and the woods around our place felt ancient and full of secrets. I'd already had a few weird run-ins by then, starting when I was 12, with something out there, something big and shadowy that didn't belong. But this day, the day I saw it full on, was different. This was the day that changed everything for me. It was a hot, sticky afternoon in late summer. I remember the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and cut grass, and the sun hung heavy in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields. I'd finished my chores early, feeding the chickens, mucking out the stalls, and Grandpa was taking a nap inside the house, his soft snooching through the screen door. I decided to head down to the creek that wound through the back 40. It was my favorite spot, a place where I could be alone and just think. The creek was shallow there, with clear water running over smooth stones, and the trees leaned in close, their branches creating a canopy that made everything feel cooler and quieter. I was skipping stones, trying to see how many times I could make one bounce before it sank. The plink, plink, plink sound was soothing, and for a while I forgot about all the strange stuff that had happened over the past couple of years. Like the time I heard that low growl moan coming from the woods when I was stacking hay bales. I'd hid behind them, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would jump out of my chest, and I saw something big and dark moving between the trees. Or the huge tracks I found near the cornfield, footprints so big they looked like a bear's, but without any claws, just rounded toes. And the knocking sounds on the barn walls at night, like someone was tapping with a giant fist. Grandpa never made a big deal out of it. He'd just say, "Don't go provoking it, and it won't provoke you." He had this way of talking about it like it was just another part of the land, something to respect, but not fear too much. By then, I'd mostly gotten used to the idea, and the fear had started to fade into curiosity. I'd even catch myself watching from a distance, trying to learn its habits. But that day, as I stood by the creek, something felt off right from the start. The woods were too quiet. Normally, you'd hear birds chirping, squirrels chattering, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. But today, it was dead silent, like everything was holding its breath. I shrugged it off at first, thinking maybe a storm was coming, but the sky was clear blue. I picked up another flat stone and sent it skimming across the water. It bounced 3 times before sinking, and I was about to grab another when I heard it, a soft crunching sound from the trees on the other side of the creek. I froze, my hand hovering over the water. My first thought was a deer, maybe a buck moving through the underbrush, but deer don't sound that heavy. This was a slow, deliberate crunch, like something big was stepping carefully, placing its feet down with purpose. I stayed still, listening hard. The sound stopped, and for a second, everything was silent again. Then it started up once more, closer this time. My heart began to thump in my chest, a steady drumbeat of alarm. I could feel the hair on my arms standing up, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I slowly straightened up, my eyes scanning the tree line. The sun was behind me, casting my shadow long across the creek, and the woods on the other side were deep and shadowy, with patches of darkness where the light didn't reach. I squinted, trying to see past the trunks and leaves. Nothing moved, but the crunching sound came again, now accompanied by a low, rumbling noise that wasn't quite a growl, more like a vibration in the air, something I felt in my teeth more than heard. It was that same growl moan I remembered from when I was 12, but deeper, more resonant. My mouth went dry and I could taste the metallic tang of fear. I took a step back, my boots squelching in the mud at the creek's edge. Part of me wanted to run, to bolt back to the house as fast as I could, but another part, the curious part that had been growing over the years, held me there. What if this was my chance to really see it, to understand what this thing was? I'd only ever caught glimpses before, a shadow moving, a shape in the distance. Grandpa's warnings echoed in my head, but I pushed them aside. I had to know. The crunching sound moved again, and this time I saw a shift in the shadows. Something was there, something massive. It was still mostly hidden by the trees, but I could make out a dark, hulking form that stood taller than any man I'd ever seen. My breath hitched in my throat, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I took another step back, my heart hammering so loud I was sure whatever it was could hear it. The air grew colder. Or maybe that was just me, my body reacting to the primal fear kicking in. Then it stepped out into a patch of sunlight near the edge of the woods. I'll never forget that image. It was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, covered in thick, dark brown hair that looked matted and coarse, like a bear's fur but longer. Its arms were huge, hanging down past its knees, and its body was broad and powerful, like a wrestler's. But it was the face that locked me in place. It had a human-like shape, but broader, with a heavy brow ridge and a flat nose, and its eyes, they were red, not like blood red, but glowing, like embers in a fire, piercing and intelligent. They fixed on me, and I felt pinned, unable to move, unable to look away. For what felt like an eternity, we just stared at each other. The creature didn't make a sound now, but I could see its chest moving slowly, breathing. It stood perfectly still, its head tilted slightly, as if it was studying me just as much as I was studying it. I could smell it too, a musky, earthy scent, like wet dog and old leaves, strong enough to make my nose wrinkle. My hands were trembling, and I clenched them into fists to try and stop it. I could feel the cool mud seeping through my jeans where I'd knelt earlier, and the sun on my back felt suddenly too hot, like it was baking me into the ground. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a bear, wasn't a man in a suit, wasn't anything I could explain. This was real, flesh and blood, and it was right there, not 50 feet away from me. I thought about all the tracks I'd found, the knocking sounds, the glimpses. This was the source. This was what had been sharing our farm all these years. And in that moment, all the curiosity I'd built up evaporated, replaced by raw, gut-wrenching fear. This thing was intelligent. I could see it in its eyes. It knew I was there, and it was making a decision about what to do next. I don't know how long we stood like that. Maybe only a few seconds, but it felt like hours. Then, the creature took a step forward, its foot sinking into the soft ground near the creek. It didn't rush or charge. It moved slowly, deliberately, like it was testing the space between us. That's when I broke. The spell shattered, and adrenaline surged through me. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran, my legs pumping as hard as they could, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The world blurred around me. Trees, grass, the fence line, all just streaks of color as I focused on getting to the house. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, drowning out any other sound. My lungs burned and my side ached. But I didn't slow down. I kept expecting to feel a hand on my shoulder, to hear heavy footsteps gaining on me. But there was nothing, just the sound of my own frantic escape. I burst through the back door of the house, slamming it shut behind me and leaning against it, panting and shaking. Grandpa was in the kitchen stirring a pot of soup on the stove. He turned and looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "What's got into you, boy?" he asked, his voice calm but concerned. I couldn't speak at first. I just stood there, gasping for air, my whole body trembling. Finally, I managed to choke out, "I saw it. Down by the creek, the big one, with red eyes." Grandpa didn't seem surprised. He just nodded slowly and set down his spoon. "Did it come at you?" he asked. "No," I said, my voice shaky. "It just looked at me. Then it took a step, and I ran." He came over and put a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, steadying. "You did right to run, but it didn't chase you, did it? That's good. It's telling you it knows you're here, but it's not looking for a fight." He paused, looking me in the eye. "Remember what I said. Respect it, and it'll respect you back. It's part of this land, same as we are." I nodded, but I was still shaking. The image of those red eyes was burned into my mind, and I knew I'd never forget it. We went about the rest of the day like normal, ate dinner, did the evening chores, listened to the radio, but I was on edge the whole time. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside made me jump. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the encounter over and over in my head. I could still smell that musky scent, still feel those eyes on me. I never saw it that close again after that day. Over the years, I'd still find tracks sometimes, or hear knocking on the barn, but it kept its distance and I kept mine. The fear never completely went away, but it settled into something else, a kind of wary respect. I learned to observe from afar, to notice the signs without intruding, and I came to believe, really believe, that we weren't alone on that farm. There was something else out there, something ancient and wild that shared the land with us. But that day, that one afternoon by the creek, was the turning point. It was the day I saw it for what it was, and the day I understood that some things in this world are beyond explanation. Even now, I can't fully put it into words. I just know what I saw, and I know it was real. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the Minnesota woods, I still get that same chill down my spine, remembering those red eyes watching me, and wondering if it's still out there, watching still. Story 6. It was April 19th, 2003. I need to write this down. I've never told anyone the whole thing, not like this because I know how it sounds, but it's been on my mind a lot lately, and I figure if anyone might get it, it's people here. We were at Jones Valley Campground, up at Lake Shasta. Me and my buddy from work. We'd driven up from Redding that afternoon, just for a quick overnight. It was one of those perfect spring days, the kind that makes you remember why you put up with all the other crap in life. The air was clean, the lake was this incredible blue, and the pine trees smelled amazing. We got our spot, set up his little pop-up camper and just messed around. We weren't there to conquer nature or anything, just to drink a few beers, cook some burgers over the fire, and get away from it all for a night. The evening was perfect. The fire was going good, just a nice, warm, crackling fire. We'd eaten. We were just sitting there in these folding camp chairs, not talking much, just watching the flames and listening to the quiet. And it was quiet. Not a dead quiet, but a good quiet. You could hear the lake water lapping way off in the distance, the occasional rustle of some little animal in the bushes, the fire popping. Normal stuff. The kind of sounds that make you feel peaceful, not alone. It must have been around 10 at night. The sky was completely black. No moon that I remember, just a billion stars punched through the dark. The fire was the only real light for what felt like miles, just this little bubble of orange pushing back against all that nothing. My friend had just gone into the camper to grab another log, and I was just sitting there staring into the coals, feeling the heat on my shins. I was completely relaxed. That's the part that gets me. How fast it all changed. The first sound wasn't even that scary. It was just a snap, a single, dry snap of a branch from the tree line, maybe 30, 40 yards away from our site. I didn't even jump. My first thought was, okay, a deer. You hear that all the time camping. An animal steps on a stick, no big deal. I glanced over in that direction, but you couldn't see anything. Just a wall of blackness past the edge of our firelight. But then it happened again, another snap. And this one was different. It wasn't the light, brittle snap of a small twig. This was thicker. It was the sound of something with real weight stepping on a good-sized branch. And the weirdest part was, I didn't hear the branch fall afterward. You know how it is. You hear a branch break. You usually hear it rustle down through the leaves and other branches to the ground. This was just the sharp crack, and then silence. Like whatever broke it was still holding it, or had just crushed it underfoot and moved on. That's when the first chill went through me. It was a physical thing, a cold trickle that started at the base of my neck and went right down my spine. I sat up a little straighter in my chair, my beer forgotten in my hand. I was staring hard into the dark now, trying to make my eyes see something, anything. But it was useless. It was like looking into black paint. Then the footsteps started. They were heavy, I mean really heavy. Not the light, quick steps of a deer, or even the shuffling four-legged walk of a bear. These were slow, deliberate thumping steps. Each one was a solid, dense sound, like someone was dropping a sack of wet sand onto the forest floor. Thump, a pause. Thump, a pause. Thump, and they were getting closer. My heart was starting to hammer against my ribs, a frantic panic beat that was suddenly the loudest sound in the world to me. I could feel my palms getting slick with sweat. I tried to tell myself it was a bear. It had to be a bear, a big one. But my gut, this deep primal part of my brain, was screaming at me that it wasn't. Bears don't walk like that. They have a different rhythm, a loping, uneven gait. This was a steady, one after the other thumping, a two-legged gait. The steps kept coming. I lost count after a while, but later, trying to piece it together, I figured there were maybe 10 to 13 of them. Each one was a little louder, a little closer than the last. It was walking straight towards our camp, not wandering, not foraging. It was coming right for the firelight, the absolute worst part. The moment that froze the blood in my veins was the last branch break. It was so close, so impossibly close. It came from just beyond the ring of light, maybe 15, 20 feet away. It wasn't a snap this time. It was a loud, sickening crack, like a thick limb being torn right off a tree. It wasn't stepped on, it was broken, with force. And the footsteps stopped right after that crack. The silence that followed was worse than the sounds. It was a thick, heavy, listening silence. The forest had gone completely dead. No bugs, no frogs, no rustling, nothing. It was as if every living thing for a mile around was holding its breath. I was holding mine. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed in that cheap folding chair, my whole body rigid, my ears straining so hard they were ringing. I was staring into the spot where that last sound had come from, and I swear to God, I could feel something there. I couldn't see it, but I could feel its presence. It was massive. It felt tall, and it was just standing there right at the edge of the dark, looking in at me. That's when I broke. The fear was just too much. It was a physical pressure in my chest, like an elephant was sitting on me. I scrambled out of the chair, my legs feeling like wet noodles, and I practically fell through the camper door. I didn't even open it properly. I just shoved my way through, my heart trying to beat its way out of my throat. My friend was half asleep on one of the bunks, reading a magazine. He looked up startled. The single dim bulb in the camper made his face look pale. "Dude, what's your problem?" he mumbled, annoyed. I couldn't get the words out at first. I just stood there, breathing in ragged, shaky gasps. I pointed a trembling finger towards the door. There's something out there," I finally managed to choke out. My voice was a dry, terrified whisper. He sat up, more alert now, seeing the state I was in. "What, a bear?" "I don't know, I don't think so. Just listen." We both went quiet. The cheap walls of the camper felt as thin as paper. For a long moment there was nothing, just the sound of my own ragged breathing. I started to feel like an idiot. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the woods just got to me. The fear began to curdle into embarrassment. Then it started again. Thump. It was right outside, just on the other side of the camper wall. My friend's eyes went wide. All the sleepiness was gone, replaced by pure confusion. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. Thump. It took a step, then another. It was circling us. We could hear the heavy, weighty compression of the pine needles and dirt with each step. It wasn't in a hurry. It was slow, methodical. It was a big, heavy thing. And it was walking around our little camper, this flimsy tin can that suddenly felt like the most fragile shelter in the world. We didn't speak, we just stared at each other, our eyes locked in a shared, rising panic. We could track its movement by sound. It went from the front past the door, down the side. The steps were so heavy I could feel a faint vibration through the floor. This wasn't some scared animal. This was something that knew exactly where it was and what it was doing. It was checking us out, testing us. It completed its circle and stopped, right by the door again. The silence came back, even heavier than before. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. My friend was pressed against the far wall, as far from the door as he could get. He had a small hatchet for splitting kindling, and he was holding it in a white-knuckled grip, but it looked like a toy in his hand. Useless. We waited. I don't know how long. It could have been 10 seconds or 10 minutes. Time had lost all meaning. Every muscle in my body was clenched tight, braced for the door to just tear right off its hinges. Then we heard it take a step, then another. But the sound was different now. It was moving away. The heavy thumps were receding, getting fainter, heading back towards the tree line. The relief that washed over me was so powerful, it made me feel weak and dizzy. I almost collapsed right there on the floor. We stayed like that, frozen, for what felt like an hour, just listening to the nothing. Eventually, the normal night sounds started to trickle back in. A cricket, the sigh of the wind in the pines. It was over. My friend finally let out a long, shaky breath. "We're leaving," he said, and his voice was flat. There was no argument in it. I just nodded. I couldn't have spoken if I tried. We didn't say another word. We didn't pack anything. We just got in his truck. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so bad he dropped them twice. When the engine roared to life, the sound was obscenely loud in the quiet night. He threw it in reverse, the headlights sweeping across the empty campsite, the dying fire, the dark, waiting trees. He didn't even turn the wheel all the way, just backed up in a wild arc and then slammed it into drive, spraying gravel everywhere as we sped out of there. We didn't talk on the drive back, we just stared straight ahead at the road, both of us wrapped in our own private terror. We never went back for the camper or our gear. His dad and his uncle went up the next day to get it. They said everything was fine, the fire was out, the chairs were there, nothing was disturbed, nothing was stolen. It was just a quiet, empty campsite. I've camped my whole life. I know what a bear sounds like. I know what a moose sounds like. I know what a falling branch sounds like. This was none of those things. This was something that walked on two legs, with a weight and an intelligence that I can't explain. I didn't see it, and in a way, that makes it worse. My mind has spent the last 20 years trying to put a face to that sound, to that feeling of being watched by something immense and unseen. I'll never go back to that part of the lake, ever. And to this day, if I'm outside at night and I hear a branch snap, my whole body goes cold, and I'm right back there in that chair, waiting for the footsteps to start. Story 7. We'd been out for maybe an hour or so, just cruising around, taking turns leading the group. The snow was perfect, deep and untouched in most places, with a crisp layer on top that sparkled under our headlights. I was riding a Ski-Doo, one of the newer models, and I love the way it handles in powder. That night, I was up front, following some game trails I'd spotted earlier. We weren't too far from the road, but far enough that the city lights were just a faint glow behind us. Everything was quiet, except for the hum of the machines and the crunch of snow under the tracks. I've always been curious about animal tracks, so when I saw something unusual off to the side, I slowed down. They weren't like any prints I'd seen before, way bigger than a moose's and shaped kind of like a human foot, but huge, like twice the size of my boot. The stride was long too, like whatever made them was taking massive steps. I remember thinking it might be a bear, but bears don't usually leave prints that look so human-like, and it was the middle of winter. Most bears are hibernating. Still, I figured it was worth checking out, so I followed the trail, weaving between trees and over little mounds. The trail led to a small clearing, and that's where things got weird. In the middle of this open spot, the snow was all messed up, like something had laid down there. I could see an indentation, almost like a nest, with the snow pressed flat and deep. It was big, maybe the size of a couch, and the tracks led right up to it and then away. My heart started beating a little faster, not scared yet, just intrigued. I've spent a lot of time in the woods and I know what normal animal behavior looks like, but this didn't fit. It felt off, like something had been resting there, watching or waiting. I decided to ride over a small mound nearby to get a better view. The snow was deep there, probably 3 feet or more, and my machine struggled a bit as I climbed up. When I crested the top, my headlight swept across the area ahead, and that's when I saw it. I'll never forget that moment. My light caught the back of something big and covered in dark, shaggy hair, only about 10 or 12 feet away. It was running away from me, moving fast through the deep snow. My brain froze for a second, trying to process what I was seeing. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't run like that, upright on 2 legs. This thing was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, and it moved with a smooth, powerful gait, like it was built for this terrain. The fear hit me all at once, like a punch to the gut. I slammed on the brakes so hard the machine skidded sideways, and I almost lost my balance. My hands were shaking, and I could feel my breath catching in my throat. The creature jumped over a snow-covered log like it was nothing, just leaped right over it without breaking stride. Then it disappeared into the trees, swallowed up by the darkness. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 or 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I just sat there, frozen, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The cold didn't matter anymore. All I felt was this raw, primal terror. I don't know how long I stayed there, but eventually my survival instincts kicked in. I twisted the throttle and spun my machine around, not caring about the tracks or anything else. All I wanted was to get back to my friends. I rode as fast as I could, the snow flying up around me, my headlight bouncing over the terrain. Every shadow seemed to move, and I kept expecting to see that thing again, chasing me. When I finally spotted the others, I waved frantically, yelling for them to follow me. They were just sitting there, idling their machines, probably wondering what my problem was. I pulled up next to them, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "We need to go now," I shouted, my voice cracking. One of my friends laughed and said, "What, did you see a ghost?" But I wasn't joking. I told them what I saw, stumbling over my words. I said it was big, hairy, and running on 2 legs. They just shook their heads. One of them said it was probably a bear, maybe a grizzly that hadn't hibernated properly. Another guy joked that I'd had too much to drink, even though I hadn't touched a drop that night. But I knew it wasn't a bear. I've seen bears up close. They don't move like that. This thing ran through deep snow like it was nothing, with a speed and grace that wasn't human or animal in any way I'd ever seen. We argued for a minute, but I insisted we leave. I didn't want to stay out there another second. Reluctantly, they followed me back toward the road. The whole ride back, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see those eyes or that dark shape following us. My hands were still trembling on the handles, and I could feel sweat cooling on my back under all my layers. When we got to the trucks, we loaded up the machines, and the mood was light, for them at least. They were laughing and joking about how I'd spooked myself over nothing. I didn't say much, I just wanted to get home. Back at my place, we warmed up with some coffee, and they kept teasing me. "Bigfoot hunter," one of them called me, and they all chuckled. But I couldn't laugh it off. I kept replaying it in my head, the way the headlight caught the hair, the way it moved, the sheer size of it. The tracks I'd seen earlier made sense now. Whatever it was strong enough to plow through deep snow without sinking much, and it had been lying in wait or resting in that clearing. I tried to describe the details, how the hair wasn't matted like a bear's, but more like thick wild fur, and how its arms swung as it ran, almost human-like, but bulkier, but they just shrugged it off. "You're imagining things," one friend said. "It's the dark and the cold plays tricks on your mind." That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, running away from me. I felt this deep, unsettling fear that I couldn't shake. In the days that followed, I thought about going back to look for evidence, but I was too scared. What if it was still out there? What if it wasn't alone? I've always been a practical guy. I work in construction, I hunt, I spend a lot of time outdoors, so I'm not prone to wild fantasies. But this was different. It felt real, too real. I did some research later, reading about other sightings in Alaska, and a lot of them matched what I saw. People talk about Sasquatch being native to these parts, something the locals know about but don't often discuss. I get why now, because when you try to talk about it, people think you're crazy. So I stopped bringing it up. But I know what I saw, the way it ran, the tracks, the sheer impossibility of it all. It wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a person in a suit. No one could move like that in deep snow, not even a professional athlete. It was something else, something beyond explanation. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, remembering that night. I don't go snow machining in that area anymore, and I'm more cautious when I'm out in the woods. The terror of that close sighting sticks with me, like a shadow I can't shake. And the ridicule, that made it worse, because it made me feel alone in this. But I had to write this down, just to put it out there. Maybe someone else has seen something similar, and they'll understand. All I know is that thing was real, and I'll never forget it. Story 8. All right, I'll just come out and say it. I don't talk about this much, because honestly, who'd believe me? But since this is a place for stuff like this, I guess I'll finally type it out. It might help to just get it out of my head. You know, this happened a few years back, in April. I remember because the spring peepers were going nuts down by the creek. That constant high-pitched chirping that kind of drills into your skull after a while. My wife, she's always been convinced. We live out in the sticks in Ohio, got a decent bit of land that butts up against a big stretch of state forest. For years, she'd hear things at night. Not coyotes, not bobcats. We know what those sound like. This was different. This was a scream, a god-awful, hair-raising scream that didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. It was too long, too intelligent, if that makes any sense. It sounded like something that knew how to make a sound that would crawl right inside you and freeze your blood. She'd always say, "That's him, that's Bigfoot." And I'd just laugh it off. I'm a practical guy. I fix my own tractor. I hunt my own meat. I believed in what I could see and touch. I told her it was probably just a fisher cat or a fox, something we hadn't encountered yet. We'd go back and forth about it, good-naturedly, but I never bought it, not for a second. But that night in April, that night changed everything. It was a Thursday. I remember that specifically because I'd spent the whole day fixing a busted fence post out by the north pasture, and my back was killing me. The sun was starting to go down, painting the sky in these oranges and purples. It was one of those real peaceful evenings. The air was cool, but not cold, with that damp, earthy smell that comes after the thaw. I decided to head out to my deer stand. It wasn't hunting season or anything. I just like to go out there sometimes at dusk. It's my quiet place. You see a lot of wildlife moving around then. Deer coming out to graze, raccoons starting their nightly patrols. It's peaceful. The stand is about a half-mile into the woods from the house. A sturdy wooden box I built myself about 15 feet up an old oak tree. It overlooks a small clearing, maybe the size of a couple football fields put together. I grabbed my jacket, a thermos of coffee, and my binoculars. My wife was in the kitchen washing up from dinner. She said, "Don't be too long," and I just grunted in response. I should have listened better. The walk out there was normal. The light was fading fast, turning the woods into a mess of long, stretching shadows. Every little sound, a twig snapping, a leaf rustling, was just a squirrel or a bird settling in for the night. I climbed up into the stand, the familiar creak of the wood under my boots. I settled in, poured myself a cup of coffee, and just breathed. This was the best part of my day, the silence, the waiting. I lifted my binoculars and started scanning the tree line on the far side of the field. For the first 20-30 minutes, it was just normal. A few deer emerged, cautious, their ears twitching at every sound. They'd graze for a bit, then lift their heads, tense, before going back to eating. I didn't think much of it. Deer are skittish. That's their whole deal. Then the woods went quiet. I mean dead quiet. The peepers by the creek just stopped. All at once, like someone flipped a switch. The deer in the field froze. Not just the usual cautious freeze, but a statue still, terrified freeze. Their heads were all pointed towards the deep woods on the north end of the field. Then, as one, they bolted. Not a graceful bound, but a panicked, crashing sprint through the underbrush, disappearing into the gloom. My first thought was coyote pack. But it didn't feel right. Coyotes are noisy. You hear them yipping and howling. This silence was heavier, thicker. It was a presence. I could feel it. My skin started to crawl like I had ants all over me. I lowered my binoculars and just stared into the dark wall of trees where the deer had been looking. That's when I saw it. The moon was starting to rise, a big bright half moon that cast a silvery light over the field. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows, a weird-shaped stump I'd never noticed before. But then the shadow moved. It stepped out from between two big pines, and my brain just stuttered. It couldn't process what I was seeing. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 8 feet, maybe more. It was just a massive silhouette against the darker trees, but the moonlight caught it enough to see it was covered in hair. Not fur like a bear, but long, shaggy, dark hair. It was built like a powerlifter, but taller than any man I'd ever seen. Shoulders that were just impossibly wide, arms that hung down past its knees. My heart started hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. I stopped breathing. I just sat there, frozen, my fingers gripping the edge of the stand so tight the wood was digging into my palms. It was just standing there in the middle of the field, maybe 150 yards away. It seemed to be looking around, its head moving slowly from side to side. And then it stopped, and it turned, and it looked right at me. I know it saw me. There's no doubt in my mind. The moon was bright enough to see its face, or what I could see of its face. It wasn't a bear's face, it was flatter, and it had this expression. This is the part that gets me, that I still see when I close my eyes. It looked startled. Its eyes, I couldn't see the color, but I could see the glint of moonlight off them, 2 little points of light in the dark. Its mouth was slightly open. It looked just as surprised to see me as I was to see it. We just stared at each other for what felt like an hour. It couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 seconds, but time just stopped. I could feel the cold sweat breaking out on my forehead, dripping down my back. I was trembling, a fine, uncontrollable shake that started in my hands and ran all through my body. I was completely exposed. I was up in a flimsy wooden box, and this thing was out in the open, and it knew I was there. Then it did something that made the fear in my gut turn into pure, cold terror. It slowly, almost gently, started to sway. Just a slight rocking motion, side to side. And then it brought its hands up, these huge, dark hands, and placed them on its knees, leaning forward a little, like a coach might lean in to talk to his players. It was studying me. It was a posture of curiosity, of assessment. It wasn't a monster roaring at the moon. It was an intelligent thing trying to figure out what I was, and the sheer normalcy of that gesture in such a completely abnormal situation was what made it so horrifying. I wasn't looking at a beast. I was looking at a person, and it was looking back at me. I felt like a bug under a microscope. I felt naked. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to hide, to get away, but I was paralyzed. I couldn't even blink. I just stared back into those 2 points of reflected moonlight, and then, as if it had decided I wasn't a threat or wasn't interesting, it straightened up. It turned away from me, its movement fluid and effortless, and it started to walk. Not a run, not a lope, a walk, but its walk. Its legs were so long, and its stride was so immense. Each step covered ground I'd need 2 or 3 steps to match. It moved with this powerful, easy grace, like the land itself belonged to it. It didn't make a sound, not one. The field had tall grass and weeds, and it should have been rustling and swishing, but it was silent, absolutely silent. It just glided across that field, its dark form getting smaller and smaller. It reached the tree line on the other side of the field, and without breaking stride, just melted into the shadows between the trees. It was gone. The second it disappeared, the spell broke. The peepers started up again down by the creek. The normal night sounds returned, but I was still frozen solid. My legs felt like jelly. My hands were shaking so bad I had to clasp them together. I sat there for another few minutes, just trying to get my breathing under control. I was gasping, sucking in air like I'd just run a mile. Then the fear really set in, the practical, immediate fear. It was out there, in the woods, between me and my house. I had to get back. I scrambled down from that stand so fast I almost fell the last few feet. I hit the ground, and I ran. I didn't care about being quiet. I didn't care about spooking wildlife. I just ran. I ran like I've never run before in my life, not even when I was a kid. Branches whipped at my face and arms, tearing at my jacket. I didn't feel them. My lungs were burning. My heart was a frantic drum in my ears. All I could think was that it was behind me, that those silent, ground-eating strides were catching up to me. I kept expecting to feel a huge hand grab my shoulder. I burst out of the tree line into our backyard, stumbling, nearly falling. The light from the kitchen window was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I wrenched the back door open and practically fell inside, slamming it shut behind me and throwing the deadbolt. My wife was standing there, a dish towel in her hand, her eyes wide. "What in the world is wrong with you?" she asked. "You're white as a sheet." I just stood there, leaning against the door, trying to catch my breath. I was drenched in sweat. My clothes were torn from my run, and I was still trembling all over. I looked at her, and I couldn't speak. I just shook my head. She came over, her face full of concern now. "Honey, what happened? Did you see a bear?" I finally found my voice, but it was hoarse, a ragged whisper. "No," I said. "It wasn't a bear." I walked over to the kitchen table and sank into a chair, my legs just giving out. I put my head in my hands. She sat down next to me, waiting. I told her everything. The silence, the deer bolting, the thing stepping out of the trees, how tall it was, how it was built, the way it looked right at me with that startled expression, the way it swayed and put its hands on its knees, the way it walked away in complete silence, covering so much ground with each step. When I finished, I looked up at her. She wasn't laughing, she wasn't smiling. She just looked at me, her expression dead serious. She reached out and put her hand over mine. "I told you," she said, her voice quiet. "I told you it was real." And I just nodded. I couldn't argue, not anymore. Every logical part of my brain had been short-circuited by what I'd seen. I'd spent years mocking her, and in one night, she'd been proven completely right. I never went back to that deer stand. I had a friend come out a week later and help me take it down. I don't like going into those woods after dark anymore. I stick close to the house. I'm a different person now. I don't argue with my wife about the screams we sometimes still hear in the distance when she looks at me and says, "He's out there tonight." I just nod. I know he is. I saw him. I don't talk about it much because what is there to say? I saw something I can't explain, something that shouldn't exist, and it looked right back at me. It saw me. And sometimes, on a quiet moonlit night, I'll look out the window towards that field, and I'll wonder if it's out there, looking back, and I still get that same cold chill, that same feeling of being completely and utterly exposed. I don't know what it was. I just know what I saw, and I know I'll never forget it. Story 9. It was one of those perfect late summer evenings, the kind that makes you remember why you put up with Illinois winters. The air was warm, but not heavy, and the light had that golden quality that makes everything look softer. I'd finished my shift at the warehouse around 4 and had this itch to just get out, to be somewhere quiet. The Vermilion River was my usual spot for that. It's not some majestic wilderness. It's just a river with its muddy banks and tangled woods, but it's my peace. I threw my old fishing tackle box and a rod in the back of the truck, whistled for my dog Rex, and we headed out. Rex is a big German Shepherd mix, about 90 pounds of pure muscle and confidence. Nothing spooks that dog. He's chased off raccoons, stood his ground against a stray dog twice his size, and once he just stared down a neighbor's foul-tempered goat until it backed down. Having him with me always made me feel secure, like I had a furry guardian angel. We got to my usual access point, a little pull-off that leads to a dirt track barely wide enough for a vehicle. It was probably an old logging road or something, all rutted and overgrown. I had to take it slow in my pickup, the branches scraping against the sides. The plan was to drive down to a bend in the river I like, where the current slows and the catfish tend to gather. It was maybe 5:45. The sun was still well above the trees, but down in that tunnel of woods it was already getting dim. I remember the smell most vividly when we first got out. It's that damp, earthy smell of river mud and decaying leaves, mixed with the fresh green scent of the trees. I opened my door and Rex bounded out, immediately sniffing around, his tail doing that happy helicopter whirl. I leaned against the hood for a second, just breathing it in. It was so quiet. Not a dead quiet, but the good kind. The buzz of insects, the distant call of a bird, the gentle rustle of leaves. It felt like the world had taken a breath. I got my gear out of the truck bed and was sorting through my lures when I realized Rex had trotted off ahead down the track. He did that sometimes, scouting the path. I wasn't worried. I called out, "Hey, bud, don't go too far," and heard him let out a single sharp bark from around the bend. I smiled to myself, probably found a squirrel to torment. I was just about to close the tailgate when I heard it. Not a bark, but a low, guttural sound from Rex. It was a noise I'd never heard him make before. It wasn't a growl of challenge. It was deeper, more confused, almost a whimper. Then there was a frantic scrabbling of paws on dirt, and he came tearing back around the bend. He wasn't running, he was fleeing. His body was low to the ground, his ears were flat against his skull, and his tail was clamped so hard between his legs it was practically invisible. He didn't stop at my feet. He scrambled right past me, his claws scratching at the dirt, and launched himself into the open door of the truck, scrambling over the seats into the passenger footwell. He curled into a tight ball, shaking violently. I could see the whites of his eyes. My heart, which had been beating slow and steady, suddenly kicked into a higher gear. What the hell could scare Rex like that? A bear? I'd heard there were black bears moving back into Illinois, but they were supposed to be shy. "Rex," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. "What is it, boy?" He just whined, a high-pitched, terrified sound, and pressed himself deeper into the floor mat. That's when the feeling started to creep in. It wasn't a thought, it was a physical sensation, a coldness that started in my gut and began spreading outwards. The peaceful evening atmosphere was gone, replaced by something heavy, something watchful. The hair on my arms stood up. I took a hesitant step forward, peering down the track towards the bend. The woods were still, too still. The insects had stopped buzzing. The birds had gone silent. It was that dead quiet I mentioned before, but this wasn't peaceful. This was the silence of something holding its breath. I should have just gotten in the truck and left. Every sane instinct was screaming at me to do just that. But there was another part, that stupid, curious part of the human brain that needs to see, that needs to know. I had to see what had sent my fearless dog into a blind panic. I walked slowly, my boots making too much noise on the gravelly dirt. My fishing rod was still in my hand, a stupid, flimsy weapon. As I neared the bend, I could see a little clearing off to the right of the track, maybe 30 yards ahead. It was a spot where the trees thinned out, letting in a bit more of the fading evening light, and that's when I saw it. At first, my brain tried to make it into a tree stump. It was tall and dark, standing upright just at the edge of the clearing, but tree stumps don't have shoulders. This thing had massive, rounded shoulders, way broader than any man's. It was just standing there perfectly still, facing away from me towards the deeper woods. It was covered in what looked like shaggy, dark hair, almost black, but with a reddish tint where the sun caught it. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 1.5 feet taller, maybe more. It was built thick, like a power lifter, but taller. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand that straight, that still. Their posture is different, more slumped. This thing was erect, solid. My mind was racing, trying to find a box to put it in and coming up empty. The cold feeling in my gut was now a solid block of ice. My hands were starting to tremble. I stood there, frozen, just staring at its back. The sheer size of it was overwhelming. It was so dense. It looked like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I could see the powerful muscles in its back and legs, even through the shaggy coat. Time seemed to stretch. It might have been 5 seconds. It might have been a minute. I don't know. Then it moved. It didn't turn its head. Its whole upper body began to rotate, slow and deliberate, like it was on a swivel. There was no hurried movement, no animalistic jerk. It was a calm, controlled turn. And as it turned, I saw its profile, a heavy, sloping brow, a flat nose, and then it completed the turn, and it was looking right at me. There were no glowing red eyes, no monstrous fangs. Its eyes were deep-set and dark, but I felt its gaze like a physical weight. It wasn't a curious look or an aggressive one. It was just awareness. It knew I was there. It had probably known the whole time. That's when the dread hit me. It wasn't just fear anymore. This was a primal, suffocating terror that rose up from the base of my spine and clamped down on my chest. It was a feeling of utter insignificance, like a mouse looking up at a hawk. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. My mouth went completely dry. Every muscle in my body was screaming, "Run!" But I was paralyzed. I just stood there, locked in its gaze. It didn't make a sound. It didn't snarl or roar. It just stood there, looking at me, its immense size now fully apparent, the breadth of its chest, the length of its arms that hung down past its knees. It was so wrong, so out of place in these familiar woods. This wasn't supposed to exist. This was the stuff of campfire stories, not a Tuesday evening on the Vermilion River. The spell broke. A jolt went through me, and I stumbled backwards, my boots catching on a root. I almost fell, but I managed to keep my feet, turning my stumble into a frantic, uncoordinated run back towards the truck. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The feeling of being watched, of that thing's eyes on my back, was so intense it felt like a brand. I crashed through the last few feet of brush and practically fell against the driver's side door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the handle to work. I yanked it open and threw myself inside, slamming the door and hitting the lock button with a trembling fist. I was gasping for air, my chest heaving. Rex was still a quivering ball in the footwell, letting out a continuous, low whine. I fumbled for the keys, my vision blurry with panic. I jammed the key into the ignition, my hand slipping because it was slick with sweat. The engine roared to life, a blessedly normal sound. I threw the truck into reverse. I didn't even try to turn around. I just stomped on the gas, and the truck shot backwards down the narrow track. Branches screeched and scraped along the sides, and I didn't care. I kept my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, expecting to see that massive, dark form step out onto the track behind me. The mirror just showed the empty, darkening path. I reversed for what felt like an eternity until the track widened enough for me to swing the truck around in a jerky 3-point turn, spraying dirt and gravel. Then I shoved it into drive and floored it. The truck bounced and jolted over the ruts, the suspension groaning. I didn't let up on the gas until I saw the paved county road ahead through the trees. When my tires hit the asphalt, the sound was a relief. I sped up, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it following me, loping out of the woods onto the road. But there was nothing, just an empty road behind me. I didn't slow down until I was a good 5 miles away, merging onto the highway. My hands were still clamped on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I was shaking all over, a fine, uncontrollable tremor. Rex had slowly uncurled himself and was sitting in the passenger seat, panting heavily, his body still pressed against the door, as far away from the window as he could get. He kept looking back towards the way we came. I got home, put the truck in the garage, and just sat there in the dark for a long time. I couldn't stop shaking. My wife asked me how the fishing was, and I just mumbled something about not catching anything. I couldn't tell her. The words wouldn't come. How do you say, I saw something in the woods that shouldn't exist, and it looked at me, and now I don't think I'll ever feel safe in the woods again? I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. That slow, deliberate turn, those dark, knowing eyes, the sheer, impossible size of it. That was 3 years ago. I haven't been back to that spot on the Vermilion River. I've tried to go fishing elsewhere, but I get this tightness in my chest as soon as the trees start to close in. Rex won't even get in the truck anymore if he thinks we're going anywhere near woods. He just plants his feet and whines. I still don't know what it was. I've read things online, stories from other people that sound a lot like mine. Tall figures, the smell, the silence, the overwhelming dread. People call it different names. I don't care what it's called. All I know is that I saw it and my dog saw it, and for one long moment on a warm summer evening, it saw us. And that was enough. Story 10. It was one of those thick, heavy July mornings in Lee County where the air feels like warm soup and the cicadas are already screaming by 7 a.m. I remember because I'd just stepped outside to get the paper, the concrete of the carport still cool under my bare feet. Mary was inside making coffee, the smell of it just starting to cut through the wet heat. Everything was normal. It was Thursday, July 14th, 1988, a date that's burned into my brain now. I saw it the second I turned the corner of the house, our car, our Ford LTD. It was just destroyed. My first thought wasn't even a thought. It was just a physical jolt, like I'd been punched in the chest. I actually dropped the rolled-up newspaper. I just stood there, my mouth hanging open, trying to make what I was seeing line up with the world I'd been in just 2 minutes before. The car was under the metal carport, right where we'd parked it the night before. But now it looked like it had been through a compactor. The roof was caved in on the driver's side, pushed down with such force that the windows on both sides had blown out. Shards of glass were everywhere, glittering in the early sun like a field of diamonds. The driver's side door was hanging by one hinge, bent outward, the metal all twisted and peeled back. It looked like a giant can opener had gone to work on it. But the worst part, the part that made my stomach just drop into my shoes, were the marks. All along the side of the car, on the roof, on the hood, there were these huge, deep gouges. They weren't scratches from a branch. They were grooves dug right into the metal, like something had dug its fingers in and just pulled. And on the front bumper, there were these weird, deep dents. It took me a second to realize what they looked like. Teeth marks. Big, wide-set teeth marks, like something had actually bitten the chrome and steel. I finally managed to get my legs to work and I stumbled closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. That's when I saw the hair, clumps of it caught in the jagged edges of the torn metal. It was long, kind of wiry, and a strange reddish-brown color, like rust mixed with old brick. And there was mud. Thick, black, swampy mud was smeared all over the car, on the windows, on the roof, in those deep gouges. My eyes dropped to the ground. The dirt and gravel around the car were a mess. There were our footprints from last night, sure, but there were others, big ones. They weren't shoes, they were bare footprints, but they were massive. I wear a size 10, and my print would have fit inside one of these with room to spare. They were long, with a weird shape, narrow at the heel, but splaying out wide at the toes, and they were deep, like whatever made them was heavy. Real heavy. The tracks led away from the carport, around the side of the house, and disappeared into the tree line that borders our property. Beyond those trees is nothing but swamp for miles. The Lynch's River Swamp. A place I've never liked, not even in the daytime. I must have made a sound, a gasp or a choked-off yell, because Mary came out onto the back porch. "Tom, what's all the—" Her voice just died. I heard her sharp intake of breath. I turned and saw her standing there, one hand flying up to her mouth, her face white as a sheet. We didn't say anything for a long time. We just stood there, staring at the wreck of our car. The only car we had, the car we were still making payments on. The silence was deafening, broken only by those damn cicadas. I remember feeling a cold trickle of sweat run down my back despite the heat. This wasn't vandalism. This wasn't kids with baseball bats. This was something else. I went inside and called the sheriff's office. My hands were shaking so bad I misdialed twice. The deputy who showed up, a young guy named Miller, he had the same reaction we did. He got out of his cruiser, took one look at the LTD, and his hat literally came off as he scratched his head. He just kept saying, "What in the hell? What in the hell happened here?" He was professional, I'll give him that. He took a lot of notes. He took pictures with a big Polaroid camera, the kind that spits out the picture. He laid a ruler next to the footprints and photographed those. He was very careful when he collected the hair samples, using tweezers and putting them into little plastic evidence bags. He kept looking from the car to the swamp and back again. "Mr. Y.E.," he said, his voice low, "you hear anything last night? Any noises?" I thought about it. The night had been quiet, but then, around 2, maybe 3 in the morning, I'd been half woken by the dogs. Not just our dog, old Buster, chained up out back, but every dog in the neighborhood. They were going crazy, a real frenzy of barking and howling. It died down after a few minutes, and I'd rolled over and gone back to sleep. I told the deputy that. He just nodded slowly, writing it down. "And you didn't see anything?" "Nothing," I said. Mary shook her head, her arms wrapped tightly around herself like she was holding herself together. The deputy finished up. He said they'd send the hair samples off to the state lab, see if the biologists could identify it. He said it was probably a bear, a big one, maybe confused or sick. He was trying to be reassuring, but his eyes didn't believe it. "You don't get bears around here, and no bear I've ever seen, even in a book, could cave in a car roof like it was tinfoil, or leave footprints that look so almost human, but not." After he left, the silence felt heavier. The car was just sitting there, a monument to whatever had happened. Mary and I tried to clean up a little, sweeping up the glass, but it felt pointless. We were just shuffling around the edges of this huge, terrifying thing. The fear didn't really hit me until later, when the sun was high and the day was blazing hot. It was a slow, creeping kind of terror. It wasn't the damage to the car, not really. It was the intent behind it. This wasn't an accident. This thing, whatever it was, had come out of the swamp, walked right up to our house, and had just attacked our car. It had mauled it. It had bitten it. Why? What was it trying to do? Get inside. Get to us. I kept looking at those tracks leading into the woods. They were so clear, so purposeful. They went in a straight line from the carport to the trees. It hadn't been wandering. It had come here, and it had left. I got my shotgun out of the closet. I hadn't held it in years, not since dove season a couple years back. The weight of it in my hands was familiar, but it didn't make me feel safe. It felt small and useless. I sat in a kitchen chair facing the back door, the gun across my lap, and just watched the tree line. Mary tried to get me to eat some lunch, but I couldn't. My stomach was in knots. Every little sound made me jump. A branch scraping the roof, the ice maker in the fridge dropping ice, the hum of a distant tractor. My senses were dialed up to 11. I could smell the damp, fecund odor of the swamp drifting in through the screen door. I could feel the gritty texture of the gunstock under my thumb. The afternoon dragged on. The heat was oppressive. I was sweating, my shirt sticking to the back of the chair. My mind kept circling back to the same questions. What was it? What did it want? The deputy said, "Bear," but I kept remembering the hair, that reddish hair. It wasn't bear fur. And the footprints. They had an arch, a heel. They weren't paw prints. As evening started to fall, the shadows from the trees began to stretch across the yard, long and dark. The fear, which had been a steady hum all day, started to sharpen into a razor's edge of dread. Night was coming. Whatever was out there was a creature of the night. It had come in the dark. It would come again. I told Mary to go to our bedroom at the front of the house and lock the door. She didn't argue. She just looked at me with wide, scared eyes and went. I stayed in the kitchen. In the dark now, just the faint glow from the stove clock, illuminating the room. I had turned off all the lights. I wanted to see out, but I didn't want to be seen. The night sounds started up. Crickets, frogs from the swamp, the occasional hoot of an owl. Each one was a little spike of adrenaline. I was straining my ears, trying to listen past them, trying to hear something that didn't belong. The weight of the shotgun was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become soft and terrifying. I must have been sitting there for hours. My back was aching, my legs were stiff. The digital clock on the stove flipped to 11:43. I remember because I was staring at it, counting the seconds. Then everything went quiet. It wasn't a gradual thing. It was instant. The crickets stopped mid-chirp. The frogs went silent. It was like someone had thrown a switch. The silence was louder and more frightening than any noise could have been. My whole body went rigid. I tightened my grip on the shotgun, my fingers aching. I was holding my breath without realizing it. My heart was thumping so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was staring so hard at the tree line that my eyes started to play tricks on me. Shadows seemed to move. Stumps looked like crouching figures. I was on the verge of convincing myself it was just my imagination, that the fear was getting to me. Then I heard it. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a roar, it was a sound I have no words for. It was low, so low I felt it more than heard it. A vibration that came up through the floorboards and into the soles of my feet. It was a deep, guttural chuffing noise, like the worst cough you've ever heard from a sick animal, but mixed with something wet and rumbling. It came from the tree line, maybe 50 yards away. Every hair on my body stood up. A cold sweat broke out all over me, instantly soaking my shirt. This was it. It was back. I raised the shotgun, pointing it in the general direction of the sound, but my hands were shaking so badly the barrel was wavering all over the place. I was breathing in short, ragged gasps. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was dust dry. The sound came again, closer this time. It was moving. I could hear it now too. Not footsteps, but a heavy, shuffling sound. The sound of something big pushing its way through the undergrowth. It was coming towards the house. I could see a shape then, detaching itself from the deeper black of the trees. It was huge, impossibly huge. It was taller than a man and twice as broad, a massive dark silhouette blocking out the stars behind it. It was walking upright, on two legs. My brain just short-circuited. It wasn't a bear. No bear walks like that so fluidly with its arms swinging at its sides. This was something else, something that wasn't supposed to be real. It stopped at the edge of the yard, right where the tracks from this morning had ended. It was just standing there, looking at the house, looking at me. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could feel its gaze. It was a physical pressure, a weight that pushed the air out of my lungs. I was frozen. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. I just stared back at this thing, this monster from the swamp that was standing in my backyard. The smell hit me then, washing over the yard and seeping in through the screen door. It was a foul, overwhelming stench like rotten meat and old wet fur and something else, something musky and wild and ancient. It made my eyes water and my stomach lurch. It took a step forward, then another. It was coming towards the carport. towards the wreck of the LTD. It didn't run, it didn't charge, it just walked, with a slow, powerful, deliberate gait that was more terrifying than any rush could have been. It was completely unafraid. It reached the carport and stopped next to our ruined car. It was even bigger up close. It must have been 8 feet tall, maybe more. It reached out one long, thick arm and laid its hand, I can't call it a paw, on the caved-in roof of the car. It wasn't an attack. It was almost a touch, a possessive touch. Then it turned its head, and it looked right at the kitchen window, right at me. I still couldn't see its face clearly, just a darker shadow within the shadow of its body. But I saw the faint glint of what might have been eyes, and in that moment I knew it saw me. It knew I was there, watching. It knew I was terrified. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, just looking at me. The silence was absolute. The world had shrunk down to this thing and me, separated by a flimsy screen door and 20 feet of lawn. Then it made that sound again, that low, wet, chuffing rumble, but this time it was different. It wasn't a threat. It sounded almost like a chuckle, a deep, horrible, knowing chuckle. It dropped its hand from the car, turned its massive body, and started walking back towards the swamp. It didn't look back, it just walked, with that same slow, powerful stride, and melted back into the trees. The second it disappeared, the night sounds started up again, the crickets, the frogs, like nothing had ever happened. I don't know how long I stood there. The shotgun still pointed at nothing. My whole body was trembling, shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. I finally lowered the gun, my arms feeling like wet noodles. I stumbled to the sink and threw up, heaving until there was nothing left. I never told the deputies about that night. What would I have said? They already thought the car thing was bizarre. Telling them I saw a 8-foot-tall, walking, hairy thing that smelled like death come back to visit its handiwork, they'd have thought I'd lost my mind. The insurance company totaled the car. The lab results came back a few weeks later. Inconclusive. The hair sample, they said, didn't match any known animal in their database. They suggested it was probably contaminated. We sold the house 6 months later and moved into town, closer to Mary's sister. I never went into those woods again. I still have trouble sleeping sometimes. I'll be lying in bed and I'll hear a dog bark in the distance, or the house will settle. And for a split second my heart will seize up and I'll be back in that dark kitchen, smelling that smell, watching that shape walk out of the trees. It knew I was there. It saw me. And the worst part, the part I still can't get past, is that I'm sure it wasn't angry, it wasn't hunting. It was just letting me know that it was out there, that it had been here, and that it could come back any time it wanted. Story 11. It was April of 2019, and I was a junior in high school. I'm Aaron. I need to write this down. I've tried to talk about it a few times, but my voice just kind of gives out, or people get this look on their face like I'm messing with them. I'm not. I wish I was. It was a Friday night, the kind that feels endless when you're 17. We were bored, the three of us, me, Cole, and Tyler, just driving around the back roads of Wilson County, Kansas, with nothing better to do. The radio was on, but we weren't really listening. The conversation, like it always did, turned to the Henderson place. The Henderson farm had been abandoned for years. The house was a skeleton, but the big barn was the real draw. It was this huge, dark shape against the sky, and the stories about it were local legend. Some kids said it was cursed, that old man Henderson had lost his mind out there and done something awful before he just vanished. We'd driven past it 100 times, but we'd never stopped, not at night. Cole was the one who said it. Let's go in. It wasn't even a question, really. It was a dare. Tyler, who was driving, just grinned and cranked the wheel, his headlights cutting a path off the main road and onto the overgrown gravel drive that led to the property. My stomach did a little flip, but I laughed it off. What else are you going to do? We were invincible, or at least we thought we were. We parked the car a good distance from the barn, near the shell of the old farmhouse. Tyler killed the engine, and the silence that rushed in was heavy. It was the kind of quiet that feels loud, you know. No crickets, no wind, nothing, just this thick pressing silence. We got out, and the cold April air bit through my hoodie. I remember the crunch of our shoes on the gravel sounding way too loud. Tyler pulled out his phone, turning on the flashlight. Cole had a little keychain light, and I had the one decent flashlight we'd brought, a heavy metal mag light from my dad's truck. The beams looked weak and small against the sheer size of that barn. It was massive, all dark weathered wood with a roof that sagged in the middle like a tired old back. One of the big double doors was hanging open, just a black mouth. We stood there for a second, none of us wanting to be the first to move. Tyler finally broke the stalemate, taking a step forward. "Chickens," he muttered, but his voice didn't have its usual cocky edge. We stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It's the one thing I can't get out of my head, even now. It wasn't just rot or mildew, though that was there. It was this sour, heavy stench. It's hard to describe, like a wet dog, but mixed with something else, something rotten and musky, like a dead animal that's been left in a damp corner for a week. It was so thick it felt like I was breathing it in, like it was coating the back of my throat. I coughed a little and pulled the collar of my hoodie up over my nose. It didn't help. Our flashlight beams cut through the dark, dancing over piles of old moldy hay and rusted farm equipment. Dust motes swirled in the light like tiny galaxies. The floor was packed dirt, and every step we took seemed to echo, no matter how lightly we tried to walk. The air was cold, way colder than it was outside, a damp cold that seeped right into your bones. We were whispering, though I don't know why. There was no one to hear us. "This place is creepy as hell," Tyler whispered, his light scanning the far walls. "Told you," Cole said, his voice tight. We poked around the main floor for a few minutes, our lights revealing nothing but decay and junk. Part of me was relieved. Maybe it was just a stupid, smelly old barn. Then I heard it. It was a soft, shuffling sound. A slow, dragging movement. It came from above us. We all froze. Our flashlight beams, which had been swinging all over the place, all snapped upward at the same time, pointing at the hayloft. The loft was a dark hole, a platform that ran along one side of the barn. You could see the edge of it, but the rest was just blackness. The sound stopped. "Probably a raccoon," Tyler said, but his voice was a thin, shaky thread. It wasn't a raccoon. I knew it in my gut. Raccoons are fast and skittery. This was slow, heavy. We stood there, not moving, not breathing, just staring up into that darkness. The only sound was the pounding of my own heart in my ears. Then the sound came again, a slow, deliberate drag, pause, drag. Something was moving around up there. My arm was getting tired from holding the flashlight so steady, but I didn't dare move it. We were all fixated on that one spot, the edge of the loft where the sound seemed to be coming from. I saw a few pieces of old brittle hay tumble over the edge and drift down to the floor. Then something else came over the edge. It was a hand, but it wasn't a human hand. It was massive, covered in thick, dark, almost black hair. The fingers were long and thick, and they curled over the wooden edge of the loft, gripping it. The knuckles were huge. A second hand appeared right next to it, just as big, just as covered in that coarse-looking hair. They were so big, they looked like they could have wrapped around my entire head. My brain just short-circuited. I couldn't process what I was seeing. It was like my mind was throwing up error messages. Does not compute, does not compute. We were all just frozen, 3 beams of light trained on those 2 huge, hairy hands. Nobody screamed, nobody said a word. We were paralyzed. Then, the thing started to pull itself up. It was slow, like it was heavy, or maybe it was just taking its time. First we saw the top of its head. It was conical, sort of, and covered in the same dark hair. Then it raised its head and our lights hit its face. I will see that face until the day I die. It was broad and looked leathery, like old tanned hide in the patches where there wasn't hair. The eyes, God, the eyes. They were set deep under a heavy brow, and they reflected our flashlight beams back at us with a dull red glow, like a dog's eyes at night, but wrong. So wrong. And its mouth. It had these large, uneven teeth, yellowed and spaced apart, and its lips were pulled back in what wasn't quite a snarl, more like it was just showing us what it had. It made a sound then, a low guttural noise that started deep in its chest. It wasn't a growl, not like a dog. It was lower, rougher, like rocks grinding together, a low grinding snarl that vibrated through the floor and right up into my feet. That sound broke the spell. I stumbled back a step, my legs feeling like rubber. My shoulder bumped hard into a wooden support beam. The thud it made was loud in the quiet barn. The creature's head snapped toward the sound. Those red reflecting eyes locked right onto me. And then it moved. It didn't climb down. It lunged. In one fluid, terrifyingly fast motion, it pushed off from the loft and dropped down. It was huge, way bigger than I could have imagined. It must have been 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Its body was covered in that same coarse, dark hair, and its arms were so long, they hung down past its knees, swinging as it landed. It hit the dirt floor with a crash that I felt more than heard. The whole barn seemed to shake. Dust and hay rained down from the rafters. For a single heart-stopping second, it was crouched there, maybe 15 feet away from us. It was massive, a wall of muscle and fur and pure, primal menace. That sour animal stench rolled off it in a wave so strong it made my eyes water. Then Tyler screamed. It wasn't a word, just a raw, terrified shriek. We turned and ran. I've never moved so fast in my life. It was a blind, panicked sprint. We burst out of the barn door, back into the cool night air, but the terror was right behind us. I could hear it. Its footsteps were deafening, heavy, thump, thump, thumps that pounded the earth, each one shaking the ground. And its roar, it wasn't a roar like a lion. It was deeper, angrier, a full-throated, raging bellow that seemed to suck all the air out of the night. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran. The tall, dead grass of the field whipped at my legs, trying to trip me. I could hear Cole and Tyler gasping and sobbing as they ran beside me, and I could smell it. That foul odor was following us, clinging to us like a fog, chasing us just as surely as the thing itself was. The car. We had to get to the car. I risked a glance over my shoulder. I wish I hadn't. It was there, maybe 30 yards back, a massive, dark shape moving through the field. It was running on 2 legs, its long arms pumping at its sides, its head down. It was fast, so much faster than something that big should be. "The car! The car!" Tyler was shrieking, fumbling for his keys. We reached the car, piling in. Tyler was in the driver's seat, his hands shaking so bad he could barely get the key in the ignition. Cole scrambled into the passenger seat, and I fell into the back, my chest heaving. I slammed the door shut just as Tyler got the engine to turn over. He slammed the car into reverse, spinning us around in a cloud of gravel and dust. He jammed it into drive and stomped on the gas. The tires screamed and we shot forward, bouncing violently down the rutted driveway toward the main road. As we hit the pavement, Tyler flicked on the headlights, and that's when we saw it. In the sweep of the headlights, just at the edge of the field where the trees started, a towering dark shape was moving. It was walking on 2 legs, its gait powerful and deliberate. It was just stepping into the shadows, but for that 1 second, the lights caught its massive broad back and its long swinging arms before it melted into the darkness. We didn't say a word the whole way back to town. We just drove, white-knuckled and silent, the only sound our ragged breathing and the hum of the engine. We dropped Cole off, then me. My mom asked if I was okay, said I looked pale. I just told her I felt sick and went straight to my room. I didn't sleep. I just sat on my bed staring at the wall, listening for any sound outside my window. The next day, Tyler's dad went out to the Henderson place. He's a hunter, knows the land. He came back looking spooked. He told Tyler he found the barn door, the big heavy one that had been hanging open, completely torn off its hinges and thrown 20 feet into the field. There were fresh, deep gouges in the wood, like claw marks, and in the soft mud around the barn, he found footprints. He said they were human-like, but not human. They were huge, each one about 17 inches long. They led from the barn and off into the fields. He called the sheriff. The sheriff came out, looked around and wrote it off as vandalism. Kids messing around, he said. Probably a bear, though everyone knows there haven't been bears in Wilson County for 50 years. A few weeks later, the county came and bulldozed the Henderson barn. They said it was a safety hazard, but that wasn't the end of it. For months after, farmers in the area reported missing livestock, a couple of sheep here, a calf there, and people started talking about hearing things at night. Strange sounds, deep, guttural calls that didn't belong to any animal they knew. I never went back. I don't even like driving down those back roads anymore. Cole and Tyler, we don't really talk about it. It's just this thing that sits between us now. Sometimes, when it's really quiet and I'm trying to fall asleep, I can still smell that sour, musky stench. I can still hear the crash of it landing on the barn floor, and I can still see those red reflecting eyes looking right at me. It wasn't a legend, it was real, and it's still out there. Story 12. It was June of 1996, and I was 20 years old. I'd driven out to the Black Hills of South Dakota from my little college town in Nebraska, my beat-up Ford Ranger filled with a tent, a sleeping bag, and a whole lot of nervous energy. This was my first vision quest. I wasn't some seasoned spiritual seeker. I was just a kid who felt lost. And a friend of a friend had mentioned that an elder from the local Lakota community sometimes guided young people through the process. I'd managed to get an invitation. The place was called Bear Butte. It's not a butte like you might picture, all flat-topped and bare. It's more of a lone mountain, a sacred place that rises out of the plains like God just decided to put one giant hill there and call it a day. It was late afternoon when I got my final instructions. The elder, a quiet man with a face like worn leather, had given me a small bundle of sage and told me to find a spot away from the main trails, to set up my camp and to just be, to listen. He said the mountain would show me what I needed to see. He also told me in a real offhand way that sometimes people saw things up there. He didn't elaborate. I figured he meant like spiritual visions, inner truths. I didn't think he meant something you could actually see with your eyes. I hiked for about an hour, my backpack digging into my shoulders, the dry South Dakota heat making my t-shirt stick to my back. The air smelled like dust and ponderosa pine, a clean, sharp smell. I found a small, relatively flat clearing nestled in a grove of pines, with a good view of a rocky ridge that curved away to the west. It felt right, private. I set up my little two-person tent, which was a struggle because I was all thumbs, and then I just sat on a fallen log, trying to quiet my mind. The whole listening thing was harder than it sounded. My brain kept chattering about finals, about a girl I liked, about whether I'd remembered to lock my truck. The sun started to dip, casting long, distorted shadows through the trees. The light turned that kind of golden orange that makes everything look like it's glowing from within. I was just sitting there, watching the light change, feeling a little silly and a lot out of place, when the birds went quiet. It wasn't a gradual thing. It was like someone flipped a switch. One second the forest was full of the chirps and rustles of evening. The next it was utterly, profoundly silent. Not even the wind in the pine needles. That was the first thing that got to me. The silence. It was a heavy silence, a pressure on my eardrums. I remember feeling my heart start to thump a little harder against my ribs. I sat up straighter on the log, my senses suddenly wide awake. I scanned the trees, but nothing moved. It was just still. eerily still. I told myself it was nothing, a hawk flying over maybe. But it felt wrong. This was a deep, pervasive quiet, the kind that feels intentional. I stood up, my knees cracking, and took a few steps toward the edge of the clearing, peering into the darkening woods. Nothing. I was about to turn back, to maybe just crawl into my tent and call it a night, when I saw movement on the ridge. My eyes snapped to it. The ridge was maybe 150 yards away, a spine of grey rock and scraggly trees against the deepening sky, and something was coming over it. At first my brain tried to make it a bear, a big, weirdly walking bear, but it wasn't. It came over the crest of the ridge with a fluidity that no bear on earth has ever moved with. It wasn't climbing or lumbering, it was just flowing over the rocks. It was tall, so damn tall, and broad. Its shoulders were massive, like a football player's pads times 10. It was covered in dark hair, but it wasn't shaggy like a grizzly's. It was shorter, denser, almost like a wet dog, and it seemed to absorb the fading light, making the creature look like a solid shadow that had detached itself from the trees. It stopped at the top of the ridge, fully upright, and it turned its head, and it looked right at me. I froze, every muscle in my body locked up, my breath caught in my throat. It was too far away to see its eyes clearly, but I knew with a certainty that felt like a physical blow that it was looking directly into me. I felt seen in a way I'd never been seen before. It wasn't a human gaze, it was older, more primal, an intelligence that was completely alien to me. The air felt charged, like right before a lightning strike. My skin prickled all over, the fine hairs on my arms and the back of my neck standing straight up. And then, without any conscious thought, I dropped my eyes. I didn't decide to do it. It was an instinct, deep and ancient, like a dog showing its belly to a dominant wolf. I looked down at the ground, at my own dusty hiking boots. I couldn't hold its gaze. It was too much. The sheer presence of it was overwhelming. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my head bowed, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack a rib. I was waiting for something, a sound, a movement, an attack. The silence was still absolute. I could feel the pressure of its stare, even though I wasn't looking. My mouth was desert dry. Finally, I forced myself to lift my head, my neck muscles tight with tension. It was gone, just gone. The ridge was empty. There were no crashing sounds of it moving away through the brush, no fading footsteps. 1 second it was there, a monolithic figure against the sky, and the next there was nothing but rock and twilight. It hadn't moved to the left or right. It hadn't ducked down. It had simply vanished, a jolt like a static shock, but originating from deep inside my chest, slammed through my body. It wasn't painful, but it was violent, a rush of pure, undiluted energy that made my teeth vibrate and my vision blur for a second. At the exact same moment, I felt a light, distinct tug on the back of my t-shirt, right between my shoulder blades. It wasn't a grab. It was like someone had gently pinched the fabric and pulled, just once. I spun around, my arms flying up to defend myself, expecting to find someone or something right behind me. There was nothing there, just empty air and my stupid little tent. My breath was coming in ragged gasps now. I was trembling all over, a fine, uncontrollable shake. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but mixed in with the terror was this bizarre, illogical feeling. I didn't feel threatened. The thing had been massive, powerful enough to tear me apart without breaking a sweat, and it had been close enough to tug on my shirt. But the feeling it left me with wasn't one of menace. It was more like a profound, earth-shattering surprise, a mutual surprise. I had been shocked by its existence, and it had been curious about mine. My voice, when I found it, was a dry croak. I didn't shout. I spoke to the empty clearing, to the woods, to whatever might be listening. "I'm going to my tent now," I said. The word sounded stupid and small in the vast silence. "I'm not going to cause any trouble. I mean no harm." I was saying it to show I was submitting, I think, that I wasn't a challenge. I backed slowly towards my tent, my eyes darting everywhere, expecting to see it step out from behind every tree trunk. My movements were jerky, fueled by pure adrenaline. I fumbled with the tent zipper, my hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get it open. I practically fell inside, then scrambled to zip it shut again from the inside. I sat in the middle of my tent, knees drawn up to my chest, wrapped in my sleeping bag. Even though I was sweating, I listened. The forest had remained silent. For hours I just sat there in the dark, straining my ears for any sound. Every tiny creak of a tree branch, every rustle of a leaf outside, sent a fresh jolt of fear through me. I was convinced it was out there, just beyond the thin nylon wall, watching me. I could feel its presence, a low hum in the air, a weight on the world. I didn't sleep. I just waited for the sun to come up. The night was the longest of my life. My mind kept replaying that moment of eye contact over and over, the sheer size of it, the way it moved, the way it just disappeared, and that tug on my shirt. What was that? A warning? A greeting? A simple, curious touch from something that had never seen a human like me before? When the first grey light of dawn finally filtered through the tent fabric, I unzipped the door and peered out. The clearing was empty. The world looked normal again. Birds were chirping. The wind sighed in the pines. It was like the previous evening had been a bad dream. I packed up my gear in a frantic hurry, my hands still unsteady. I didn't even roll my tent properly, just stuffed it into its bag. I hiked back down the mountain at a near run, my backpack slamming against my spine with every step. I didn't feel safe until I was back in my truck, the doors locked, the engine running. Later that day, I met with the elder again to tell him I was leaving. I was stammering, trying to find the words to describe what I'd seen. I told him about the tall, broad creature, the eye contact, how I had to look away, how it vanished. I didn't mention the energy rush or the tug on my shirt. Those things felt too personal, too strange. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he just nodded slowly. "Others have seen it," he said, his voice calm. "On the mountain. It's been here a long time. They say it's good luck to see it, a sign you were where you were supposed to be." Good luck. I just stared at him. My hands were still shaking. The profound shock of that mutual surprise was etched into me, a permanent scar on my mind. It wasn't a feeling of good luck. It was the feeling of having the veil between worlds ripped aside for just a second, of staring into the eyes of something that wasn't supposed to exist and having it stare right back. The elders called it good luck, and maybe in the grand scheme of things it was, but in that moment, and in every moment I've relived it since, it was just pure, undiluted reality shifting under my feet. I drove away from Bear Butte that day, and I've never been back. But sometimes on a quiet night when the wind is just right, I remember the silence and the feeling of that gentle tug on my shirt, and I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that it was all real. Story 13. It was one of those ideas that sounds perfect when you're planning it over a map in your warm, well-lit living room. A long weekend camping on Vancouver Island. Just me and my husband getting away from the noise and the emails and the constant hum of the city. We'd been to the island before, always sticking to the more popular spots near Tofino or Ucluelet. But this time, we wanted to go deeper, past Port Alberni, up one of those old logging roads that finger their way into the real wilderness. We wanted quiet. We got it, just not the kind we were looking for. The day started fine. The sky was that soft, washed-out grey that's normal for the coast, but it wasn't raining. We'd stocked up on supplies in Port Alberni, filled the tank, and headed west. The pavement ended, and the world narrowed to a gravel track hemmed in by a wall of immense trees, their branches creating a tangled roof that blocked out most of the light. Our truck, a sturdy 4x4, felt suddenly small. The road got worse the farther we went, becoming more of a suggestion of a road than an actual road. It was chewed up by weather and heavy machinery, dotted with potholes that were more like small ponds. We were looking for a specific spot my husband had found on a satellite map, a little pull-out near a creek. We were probably only 20-25 kilometers past the last sign of anything you could call civilization, but it felt like a different planet. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth and cedar. It was so quiet. Not a peaceful quiet, but a heavy, waiting kind of quiet. The only sounds were the crunch of our tires on the gravel and the occasional thump as we hit a particularly nasty dip. The sound, when it came, was nothing like those other thumps. It was a loud, sickening crunch, followed immediately by a rhythmic flapping whoomp, whoomp, whoomp. My stomach dropped. We both knew what it was before we even came to a stop. I looked at my husband and saw the same grim understanding on his face. He pulled over into the widest part of the road he could find, which wasn't very wide at all. We got out. The back passenger side tire was completely shredded. A long, jagged spear of grey rock, sharp as a knife, was jutting up from the roadbed, right where our tire had passed. It had torn a gash in the rubber so deep you could see the metal rim beneath. We just stood there for a minute staring at it. The reality of our situation started to sink in, cold and heavy. We were in the middle of nowhere, on a road that probably saw one vehicle a week, if that. My husband, ever the pragmatist, went to the back to get the spare. That's when the second wave of dread hit. He unlatched the compartment, moved our gear bags around, and then just went still. His shoulders slumped. He turned to me, his face pale. "It's not here," he said, his voice flat. "I took it out last month to make room for the camping gear. I forgot to put it back in." The silence that followed was thicker than before. It pressed in on us. We were stranded, completely. We had cell phones, of course, but out here, they were just expensive bricks. No service, not a single bar. We got back in the truck, the initial shock giving way to a low, buzzing anxiety. My husband dug out our paper map, thank God we had one of those, and traced the road back with his finger. "There's a fork about 5 kilometers back," he said. "Maybe if we walk to there, we can get a signal, or flag someone down." But the thought of walking, of leaving the relative safety of the truck, made my skin crawl. I couldn't explain it. It was just a feeling, a primal itch between my shoulder blades. "Let's just wait here for a bit," I said. "Maybe someone will come by." He agreed, though I think he was just humoring me. He got out and tried to use the satellite communicator we'd rented, a little emergency device. It was supposed to work anywhere. It was flashing a red light, searching for a signal that wouldn't come. Something about the dense canopy, the steep valley walls, was blocking it. So we waited. The first hour was okay. We talked, we made a plan, we ate some of the snacks we'd packed. The second hour was harder. The grey afternoon light began to fade, leaching the color from the world. The trees, which had just been trees, started to feel like a crowd, a silent, watching crowd. I found myself staring into the woods, trying to see into the shadows between the massive trunks. I told myself I was being stupid. It was just the woods. It was just getting dark. But the feeling wouldn't go away. That feeling of being watched. It's hard to describe if you've never felt it. It's not a thought. It's a physical sensation. The fine hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stood up. A cold trickle of sweat ran down my spine despite the chill in the air. I kept scanning the tree line, my eyes jumping from one dark patch to another, convinced I was about to see something move. My husband noticed. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. "I don't know," I whispered. "I just feel like we're not alone." He looked out his window, then back at me. He didn't laugh it off. He just nodded slowly, his own eyes darting towards the forest. "It's probably just an animal, a bear or something. They're curious." But this didn't feel like curiosity. Curiosity is quick, furtive. This felt patient, intent. The darkness fell quickly then, a blanket dropping over the world. We turned on the truck's interior light, but it just made the world outside our windows feel blacker, more impenetrable. We were a tiny island of light in an ocean of night. We turned it off, deciding it was better to let our eyes adjust. We sat in the dark, listening. The normal night sounds, the chirp of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, were absent. It was a dead, absolute silence. That was the worst part. The silence. I had to pee. It had been hours, and the pressure in my bladder was becoming unbearable. I didn't want to say anything. The idea of opening that door, of stepping out into that silent, watching dark, made me feel physically ill, but I couldn't hold it anymore. "I have to go to the bathroom," I finally said, my voice tight. My husband sighed. "Okay, be quick. I'll keep the door open. Shine the headlights." He started the truck, and the twin beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead and a strip of the forest edge to our right. The light didn't penetrate the woods. It just made the first line of trees stand out like pale, skeletal sentinels with pure blackness behind them. I took a deep breath, unlocked my door, and stepped out. The cold air hit me like a slap. It was much colder than I'd expected. I hurried to the front of the truck, just past the bumper, wanting to be quick, but also wanting to stay within the circle of light. I squatted down, the gravel sharp under my shoes. My heart was hammering in my chest, so loud I was sure it was echoing in the silence. I finished as fast as I could, my ears straining for any sound beyond the idle rumble of the truck engine. That's when I looked up. My eyes, drawn by some deep instinctual pull, went past the headlights' glare into the wall of blackness between two particularly large cedar trees just inside the tree line. At first I saw nothing, just shadows. Then my brain started to piece the shadows together. It wasn't a tree trunk. It was too thick, too vertical, and it was covered in something dark and matted. It was a figure. It was standing perfectly still, maybe 15-20 yards away, just inside the brush. It was tall, so much taller than a man. Its shape was massively broad at the shoulders, tapering down. It was covered in hair or fur that looked black and shaggy in the dim light reflecting off the road. But its face was what stopped the air in my lungs. It wasn't a bear's face. It was flatter, more human-like, but utterly wrong. And its eyes. They caught the faint edge of the headlights and reflected back a dull reddish glow. They weren't moving. They were fixed on me. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even blink. It was like every cell in my body had just shut down in sheer, uncomprehending terror. This wasn't an animal investigating a noise. This thing was watching. It had been watching. It was standing there with a stillness that was unnatural, its gaze locked onto me with an intensity that felt physical, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I don't know how long I stayed like that. A second, a minute, a small, strangled sound escaped my throat. It was enough. I scrambled backwards, my legs weak and clumsy, my feet slipping on the gravel. I didn't take my eyes off it. It didn't move. It just stood there, a statue of darkness and muscle, its red-tinged eyes burning into me. I fumbled for the truck door handle, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't get a grip. My husband, seeing the pure panic on my face, leaned over and shoved the door open from the inside. I fell into the passenger seat, gasping, my whole body trembling. "What? What is it?" he demanded, his voice sharp with alarm. I couldn't form words. I just pointed a trembling finger towards the trees. "There," I choked out. "In the trees, looking at us." He leaned forward, peering through the windshield, following my pointing finger. I saw his body go rigid. He saw it too. His breath hitched, a sharp, inward hiss. "Oh my God," he whispered. The color drained from his face completely. He didn't question it. He didn't say, "Are you sure?" or "It's just a shadow." He saw it, and he knew, just as instantly as I had, that it was something we weren't supposed to see. something that shouldn't exist. His movements became frantic, but controlled. He hit the door locks. The solid thunk-thunk was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. He shifted the truck into drive and gunned the engine, the tires spinning for a moment in the gravel before catching. He swung the truck around in a tight, jerky three-point turn, pointing us back the way we'd come. The headlights swept across the forest, and for a split second, they illuminated the figure fully. It was still there, unmoved. Its head was slightly tilted as if studying us. The light showed more detail. The fur was long and looked coarse, clumped in places as if wet. The sheer bulk of it was staggering. It made our truck feel like a toy, and those eyes, now fully in the light, didn't shine like an animal's. They seemed to absorb the light, glowing with a deep, ancient malevolence. It wasn't afraid of us. It wasn't afraid of the truck. It was just observing. My husband slammed on the brakes. We couldn't go anywhere. The shredded tire was on the back now, but driving on a rim would destroy it in minutes, leaving us even more stranded and on foot. We were trapped. We had to wait for the tow truck we'd somehow managed to call hours earlier, when we'd briefly gotten a sliver of signal at a higher point on the road. So we sat, locked in our metal box. We didn't speak. What was there to say? We just stared out the windshield, our eyes glued to that spot in the trees. It never moved. It didn't make a sound. It just stood there, a silent, monstrous sentinel in the dark, its gaze never wavering from our truck. The feeling wasn't just fear anymore. It was a deep, soul-chilling horror. This thing had intelligence. It had purpose. It was waiting for something. And we were the object of its unnerving, infinite patience. Time lost all meaning. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour. We just sat, shivering, holding hands so tightly our knuckles were white. Every creak of the truck settling, every sigh of the wind made us jump. We were waiting for it to move, to charge, to do something. But it didn't. Its stillness was more terrifying than any movement could have been. Then, far in the distance, we saw a bobbing light, a single headlight growing brighter. The tow truck, a wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy, washed over me. I started to cry, silent, shaking sobs. My husband let out a long, shuddering breath. The tow truck, a big, rugged flatbed, pulled up behind us, its powerful lights flooding the area. The driver, a big guy in a plaid jacket, got out. We scrambled out of our truck, our legs still wobbly. We didn't look at the trees. We couldn't. We just hurried towards the driver, towards the solid, normal reality he represented. "Flat tire, huh?" he said, his voice booming in the silence. Rough place for it. We just nodded, unable to speak. He got to work, efficient and professional. He hooked up our truck, winching it onto the flatbed. The whole time, I kept my back to the forest. I could feel it, though. That gaze. It was still on us. When we were ready to go, my husband and I climbed into the cab of the tow truck, squeezing into the passenger seat. As the driver put his truck in gear and began to turn around, his headlights swept across the tree line one last time. I couldn't help it. I looked. It was still there. In exactly the same spot. It hadn't retreated an inch. Its head had turned slightly following the arc of the headlights, its eyes now fixed directly on the tow truck, on us, inside it. It watched us, a massive, dark shape of impossible stillness. As the driver completed his turn and started driving us back down the rough road, away from that place, we drove for a full minute before either of us could speak. We just stared ahead, at the safe, mundane gravel road illuminated by the headlights. The tow truck driver glanced over at us. "You two okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." My husband found his voice first. It was rough, cracked. "Something was watching us," he said. "Back there, in the trees." The driver was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice much quieter now. "This is an old land, lots of forest, lots of things in it best left alone." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. We drove the rest of the way to his shop in Port Alberni in silence. We got our tire fixed. We drove home the next day. We never went back. But I still see it. Every time I close my eyes, especially in the dark, I see it standing there, just inside the tree line, unmoving, silent, its dark, hairy form and those terrible, patient, glowing eyes fixed on us. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. It was something else, something that lives in the deep, quiet places and knows how to wait. We were just visitors in its world. And for over an hour, it made sure we knew it. Story 14. Okay, I'll try to write this like I'm the person it happened to, posting online. Here goes. So I've been sitting on this for a while. I don't really talk about it much, because who'd believe me, right? But I found this place, and it seems like maybe some of you get it. I'm a bow hunter, have been since I was a kid. My dad taught me. We'd go out in these same woods in central Pennsylvania every fall. It's my happy place, or it was. This happened in October of 2019. Late October, the air getting that real crisp bite to it, leaves all crunchy underfoot. I remember the date because it was a Saturday, the one before my buddy was supposed to come up from Philly to join me. I was scouting, getting a feel for the area again, seeing where the deer were moving. I was in this stretch of woods I know pretty well. It's not super deep wilderness, but it's enough that you can feel alone. Thick, rolling hills, a lot of oak and hemlock, with this one creek that cuts through a valley. I was following a game trail that runs parallel to the creek, maybe 50 yards up the bank. I was moving slow, real slow. You know how it is with a bow. It's not like a rifle where you can take a shot from a couple hundred yards. You got to get close. So you learn to be quiet, to just be part of the woods. I was in that zone, just putting one foot softly in front of the other, my eyes scanning the shadows for movement, for a flicker of a brown tail or the shape of an antler, and then everything just went quiet. It's a thing you hear about, but you don't really get it until it happens to you. It wasn't just a little less noise. It was a total dead silence that dropped over everything all at once, like a blanket. 1 second, there were squirrels chattering, birds calling, the light rustle of the wind. The next second, nothing. Absolute zero. It was so complete it felt heavy, like the air itself had gotten thicker. I just stopped. My whole body went on alert. It's a primal feeling, a cold knot tightening in your gut. Something was wrong. Really, really wrong. I stood there for what felt like a full minute. Just listening to my own heart thumping in my ears, my hand was tight on my bow. I remember thinking it was maybe a bear. We have black bears around, and if one's close, the woods will sometimes go quiet. So I'm trying to peer into the thicket downhill towards the creek, looking for a dark shape moving in the brush. That's when I heard the thuds. Not like footsteps. Footsteps have a rhythm. These were heavy, single, deliberate thumps, like someone was dropping a big sack of potatoes on the ground, one after another. Thud. A couple seconds of silence. Thud. They were coming from further down the trail, around a bend where the hemlocks get really dense. The sound was deep, solid. It vibrated right up through my boots. My brain was still trying to file it under weird bear when I saw it. Movement. About 80 yards away, just a dark shape standing upright between two trees. It was tall, so damn tall. My first stupid thought was, is that a guy in a ghillie suit? But it was too big. The shoulders were impossibly broad, and its arms, they were long, like hanging down past its knees long. It was just standing there, facing away from me, looking down towards the creek. It was a dark brown, almost black color, and it was just massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing made me feel like a child. Instinct took over. I slowly, so slowly, I thought my joints were creaking, raised my binoculars from my chest. I got them up to my eyes, my hands shaking so bad the image was jittering. I focused. The detail hit me like a punch. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. The hair was long and matted, kind of shaggy. I could see the power in its back, the way the muscles moved under that dark fur. It had a head, not a snout, It was just starting to turn its head slightly, and I could see the side of a wide, flat face, and then it saw me. I don't know how it knew. I didn't make a sound. The wind wasn't blowing towards it, but the second the lenses of my binoculars were pointed at it, its head snapped around. I mean, snapped. It was fast, unnaturally fast. I was still looking through the glasses and I saw its eyes. They were deep set and dark, and they were locked right on me. There was an intelligence there, a sharp, aware, pissed-off intelligence. It dropped. 1 second it was standing there, 8+ feet of pure muscle, and the next it was in a crouch, like a linebacker getting ready for a play. It didn't look away from me, not for a second. Then it charged. The silence shattered. It exploded out of that crouch with a speed I cannot even describe. It wasn't a run, it was a burst, a freight train coming right at me. It didn't roar or yell, it was completely silent, which was 1,000 times worse. The only sound was the crashing. It wasn't dodging the underbrush. It was plowing through it, small trees, thick, thorny bushes. It just smashed through them. The sound was a wave of snapping branches and tearing leaves coming straight for me. I didn't think. There was no thought. My body just moved. I dropped my binoculars. I heard them hit a rock with a crack, and I spun around and I ran. I sprinted. I have never run that fast in my life. It was a blind, sheer panic. My bow was still in my hand, and I remember thinking, this is useless. This is so useless. I wasn't running towards anything. I was just running away. About 20 yards back up the trail, there was a big white oak tree I'd passed earlier. It had low, thick branches. That tree was the only thing in my mind. It was my only chance. I could hear it behind me, the crashing getting louder, closer. I could feel the vibrations in the ground. It was gaining. It was so fast. I reached the tree and I threw my bow up into the lower branches. I didn't care if it broke. I just launched it. Then I jumped, grabbing the lowest branch, and scrambled up. I'm not a great climber, but fear gives you strength. I was hauling myself up, my boots slipping on the bark, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I got up to where the branches forked, maybe 15 feet up, and I wrapped my arms and legs around the trunk, clinging to it like a koala. The crashing stopped. It was right below me. I could hear it breathing. It wasn't panting, not like a tired animal. It was a deep, heavy, rhythmic sound, like a bellows. Ha, ha, ha. I was trembling so hard I was afraid I'd shake myself right out of the tree. I was sweating, but I was cold. I couldn't make myself look down. I just pressed my face against the rough bark of the tree and squeezed my eyes shut. Then I felt the tree move. It was a slight, firm pressure. I forced one eye open and looked down. Its hand was on the trunk. Its hand. It was huge. I mean the size of a dinner plate. It was covered in the same dark hair. But the palm, what I could see of it pressed against the bark, looked dark and leathery. The fingers were thick, and they ended in these blunt, dark nails, not claws. It was just resting its hand there, applying pressure. It wasn't shaking the tree. It was just letting me know it was there, that it could reach me. Slowly, so slowly it felt like my neck bones were cracking. I lifted my head and looked. It was standing right at the base of the tree, looking up at me. Its head was tilted back, and those deep-set eyes were locked on mine. It was even bigger up close. Its shoulders were like boulders. Its chest was massive. The smell hit me then, a wave of it. It's hard to describe. It was musky, like a wet dog, but mixed with something else, something foul, like old rot and dirt. It was overpowering. We just stared at each other for maybe a full minute, which felt like an hour. Its face was broad with a heavy brow ridge that shadowed its eyes. The nose was wide, flat. Its mouth was a straight line. It didn't snarl. It didn't show its teeth. It just looked, and in that look I didn't see mindless animal rage. I saw assessment. I saw control. It was asserting dominance completely and totally, and it was doing it without making a single sound. It was telling me, without words, that this was its woods, that I was nothing, that it could end me whenever it wanted, and it was choosing not to. The fear was so complete it was almost peaceful. I was past the screaming in panic stage. I was just frozen, a prisoner in that tree, held by its gaze. I could see every detail, the way the hair on its head was shorter, the way a few strands of hair on its forearm moved in a slight breeze. The sheer, raw power in its neck and shoulders. This was no costume, this was no bear. This was something else, something real and solid and terrifying. Then it blinked, it broke the stare. It slowly lowered its head, took its hand off the tree, and turned around, and it walked away. It didn't crash through the brush this time. It moved silently. For something that big, the silence was breathtaking. It just melted into the trees, its dark form disappearing into the shadows. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. The woods were still dead silent. I didn't move. I don't know how long I stayed up there, long enough for my legs to cramp and go numb, long enough for the sun to start dipping below the hills, casting long, creepy shadows through the forest. The normal sounds started to trickle back in. A bird chirped hesitantly, then another, but I didn't trust it. I thought it was a trick. I was convinced it was still down there, waiting for me to come down. It was getting dark for real when I finally decided I had to move. My bladder was screaming, and the cold was seeping into my bones. I climbed down so slowly, my muscles stiff and aching. Every rustle of a leaf made me jump. I got to the ground and just stood there for a minute listening, my back pressed against the tree. The forest felt different. It felt watched. I found my bow a few feet away, lying in some leaves. The sight was bent, but it was okay, I didn't care. I then looked at the base of the tree. There was a footprint. Well, more like an impression in the soft soil and moss. It was huge. Long. I didn't have a tape measure, but I put my boot next to it. My size 11 boot looked like a toy. It was easily 18, 19 inches long, and it was deep. Whatever made it was heavy. Seriously heavy. And leading away from the tree back towards the creek was a trail of broken branches and crushed ferns. Not a mess, but a clear path, like something very large and very solid had passed through and didn't bother to go around anything. I got out of there. I didn't run this time. I walked backwards for the first 20 yards, my bow held uselessly in front of me, my eyes scanning every shadow. Then I turned and walked as fast as I could without running back to my truck. I didn't stop shaking until I was inside with the doors locked. I never told my buddy. I made an excuse about being sick. I didn't go back to those woods for over a year. Even now, when I go hunting, I stick to the edges. I get jumpy when the woods go quiet. I've turned that afternoon over in my head 1,000 times. The intelligence in its eyes, the way it didn't just attack but made a point, the sheer control it had. It wasn't just a monster. It was something that knew what it was doing. It knew I was scared, and it used that. That's what haunts me, not the size or the speed or the smell. It's the intelligence, the fact that it looked at me, a human with a weapon, and decided it didn't have to fear me at all. And it was right. I still have the bent sight on my bow. I never fixed it. I guess it's a reminder that there are things in those hills that we don't understand, and maybe we're not supposed to. And sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't being chased, it's being let go. Story 15. It was one of those humid summer afternoons where the air feels thick enough to chew. The kind of day where you just want to get the chores done and get back inside to the air conditioning. I was out mowing my lawn, a Tuesday, I think, the second week of July. The sun was high and bright, beating down on the back of my neck, and I could feel the sweat already starting to soak through my t-shirt. My property isn't huge, but it backs up against a decent patch of woods that separates our subdivision from the farmland further out. It's that semi-rural mix you get around here in LaSalle County. Neat houses with trimmed lawns that just sort of peter out into wilder land. I've lived here for 8 years and never thought twice about it. The woods are just there, a part of the scenery. I was making my last pass along the back fence line, the mower chugging along, spitting out the smell of cut grass and gasoline. I remember I was thinking about what to make for dinner, my mind a million miles away from anything strange. I turned the mower to head back towards the house, and that's when I saw it. Movement in my peripheral vision over in my neighbor's yard. I turned my head thinking it was maybe a deer. We get them all the time, but this wasn't a deer. It was a creature, a thing. I don't even know what to call it. It was crossing from the line of oak trees at the edge of my neighbor's property, heading towards a thicker patch of brush and scrub trees about 75 yards away. It was moving fast, but not running. It was this powerful, fluid lope, like it was in a huge hurry, but its body was just built for covering ground, without any wasted effort, and it was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least a foot taller than me, maybe more. 7 feet easy. It was covered in hair, but not shaggy or matted like a bear. This was different. It was a glossy, dark brown, almost black in the direct sunlight, and it lay close to its body, like the fur on a healthy otter or something. It just gleamed. The sheer size of its shoulders and back is what hit me first. They were impossibly wide and bunched with muscle that moved under that glossy coat with every stride. Its arms were long, swinging slightly as it moved, and its legs were thick and powerful. It didn't look at me. It didn't make a sound. Not a single crack of a twig, not a grunt, nothing. The only sound was my goddamn lawnmower. My brain just short-circuited. It tried to file it under bear, but it was walking upright, perfectly upright, and its proportions were all wrong. The legs were too long, the arms too. It wasn't a bear. It tried to file it under a person in a suit, but that was even more ridiculous. The way it moved was organic, real. There was a raw, animal power in its gait that no person could ever fake. And why would anyone be in a 7-foot-tall fur suit sprinting across my neighbor's yard on a Tuesday afternoon? This all happened in a matter of seconds. I watched it cross the entire span of that open yard, 75 yards. I know that distance because I've paced it off since, trying to make sense of it. It covered that distance in maybe 15 seconds. It was so fast, silently, swiftly, just eating up the ground. Then it reached the brush line. It didn't push through the branches or slow down. It just seemed to blend. 1 second it was this solid, dark, massive form in the bright green grass, and the next it was gone, absorbed into the shadows and the leaves without a trace. My hand was still on the mower's handle. The engine was still roaring. The vibration was buzzing up through my arms, but I was frozen solid. My feet felt glued to the ground. I just stood there, staring at the spot where it had disappeared, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought I was going to be sick. The terror didn't hit me all at once. It started as a cold trickle in my stomach. Then it just exploded. It was a full-body primal fear, the kind that bypasses your brain and goes straight to your lizard spine. My mouth went completely dry. I could feel a cold sweat break out all over my body, a sharp contrast to the heat of the day. That's when my brain finally caught up, and the real horror set in. The size, the power. I had just seen something that by all rights shouldn't exist, something that could have easily snapped me in half without even breaking a sweat, and it had been right there, in broad daylight. It hadn't been hiding, it was just going about its business, moving from one patch of cover to another, completely unconcerned that I was there watching. My fingers finally unclenched from the mower's handle, and I fumbled for the kill switch. The engine sputtered and died, and the sudden silence was deafening. It was so quiet. The birds had stopped chirping. Everything was still. The only sound was the blood pounding in my ears. I stood there for I don't know how long, just staring at the tree line. My legs felt like jelly. Part of me expected it to come back out, to step from the shadows and look at me. But nothing moved. I finally forced myself to move. I started walking backwards towards my house, my eyes locked on that spot in the brush. I didn't turn my back on it. I couldn't. Every nerve in my body was screaming that it was still there, watching me from the darkness. I felt exposed, like a rabbit in an open field. I made it to my back deck, my hand scrambling for the doorknob behind me. I yanked the door open, stumbled inside, and slammed it shut, twisting the deadbolt with shaking hands. I leaned my back against the door, breathing hard, my whole body trembling. I peered out the little window in the door, my view of the tree line now partially blocked by my own shed. Was something moving back there? Was that a shadow or just the leaves shifting in the breeze? I couldn't tell. My mind was painting monsters on every surface. I spent the next hour just pacing my living room, jumping at every little sound. The house settling, the fridge kicking on, a car driving by out front. Each noise made my heart leap into my throat. I kept going from window to window, peering out, scanning the tree line. Nothing. It was just a normal, quiet afternoon again. But it wasn't. It would never be normal again. The rational part of my brain was trying to wrestle control. You saw a bear. It was a weird bear. You're tired. It was hot, you imagined it. But I knew, with a cold, sick certainty, that I hadn't imagined a damn thing. The image of that glossy, dark form, moving with such silent, powerful purpose, was burned into my retinas. I knew I had to finish the lawn. The grass was half cut, and leaving it like that would feel like letting it win, like I was too scared to go back outside. So after my heart rate had settled from a gallop to a trot, I went back out. I didn't want to. Every fiber of my being was telling me to stay inside, to lock the doors and hide. But I forced myself. I started the mower again, the sound now feeling obnoxiously loud, like a dinner bell. I felt like a target. I mowed the rest of the lawn in record time, my head on a swivel, my back prickling the whole time. I kept glancing over at my neighbor's yard, at the oak trees, at the brush. Every shadow was a threat. Every rustle of leaves was it coming back. When I was finally done, I put the mower away in the shed, my movements rushed and clumsy. I practically ran back to the house, locking the door behind me again. I spent the rest of the day feeling jumpy and unsettled. I didn't tell my wife when she got home from work. What would I even say? "Hey, honey, I think I saw Bigfoot in the Johnson's yard today." She'd have laughed, or worse, been genuinely concerned for my mental health. So I kept it to myself. For days, I just sat with it. The memory wouldn't fade. It was this heavy, cold stone in my gut. Then, a few days later, I was taking out the trash, and my neighbor from across the street was out doing the same. We got to talking about the weather, the usual stuff. Then she said, out of the blue, "You know, my dogs have been going nuts lately." I froze. "Yeah?" I managed to say, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, for the past few nights, just barking their heads off at the back tree line for no reason. And a couple times I've heard these loud knocks, not like a branch falling, more like someone whacking a tree with a really big stick. It's weird." A cold chill, completely separate from the summer heat, ran down my spine. Loud knocks. I'd heard them too. Not recently, but about a year ago. It was late at night, and I'd been letting the dog out. I heard 3 sharp, distinct thwacks from deep in the woods. They were so loud, so percussive, they echoed. It didn't sound like any animal I knew. I'd written it off as some kids messing around, or maybe a hunter, even though it was the wrong season. I'd forgotten all about it until that exact moment. Hearing her say it, connecting her experience to mine, to the thing I saw, it made the whole event feel 10 times more real and 100 times more terrifying. It wasn't just me. It wasn't a one-time fluke. This was a pattern. This thing, whatever it was around. It had been around. That was the moment the simple scare of seeing something strange curdled into a deep, lasting unease. This isn't just some story. This is my life now. I look out at those woods every single day, and I don't see trees and shade anymore. I see a place where something hides, something massive and silent and powerful that can cross an open yard in broad daylight and vanish without a sound. I'm more aware of every little noise at night. I keep my outside lights on later. I'm hyper-aware of the mysteries living right on the edge of our semi-rural comfort. And I know, with a certainty that keeps me up sometimes, that we are not as alone out here as we like to think. The thing is, I never saw its face. I don't know if it had glowing eyes or huge teeth. I just saw its back, its powerful body moving away from me, and in a weird way, that makes it worse. My mind has had to fill in the blanks, and it's conjured up 100 different, terrifying possibilities. All I know for sure is what I saw that Tuesday afternoon, a sight that shattered my understanding of my own backyard and left me with a fear that's now just a permanent part of my life, a low-grade hum of dread that's always there, just beneath the surface, waiting for the next loud knock in the night. Story 16. It was the kind of call we get all the time. A structure fire, middle of nowhere, an old lady living by herself. I'd been a firefighter for over 20 years at that point, back in 2012. You see a lot of weird stuff in 2 decades, stuff that doesn't make the papers, but you just file it away. This one, though, this one I can't file away. It's just there, stuck in my head. The call came in a little past 9 at night. Late autumn, so it was already pitch black out. The air had that cold, damp bite to it, the kind that seeps right through your turnout gear. We were rolling out to Hickory Lane, a rural route I knew pretty well. Mostly farms and woods, houses spaced far apart. The address was for a widow, Mrs. Gable, who everyone knew lived alone. Dispatch said a neighbor had seen the glow and called it in. We were the first engine on scene. My captain, a guy named Mike, was driving. I was riding shotgun, and 2 other guys, Rick and the probie, Ben, were in the back. We came around the last bend and saw it. The back porch of this little white farmhouse was fully involved. Orange flames were licking up the side of the house, eating into the roof over the porch. Black smoke was pouring out, thick and oily. It wasn't the worst fire I'd ever seen, but it had a good head start. Mike got on the radio, calling in our arrival and confirming we had a working fire. We pulled into the gravel driveway, the engine's headlights cutting through the dark, illuminating the swirling smoke. I remember the sound of the gravel crunching under the tires, a loud, familiar noise that usually meant we were getting down to business. I hopped out, the cold air hitting my face, and started pulling on my SCBA mask. The air immediately tasted like plastic and compressed air. The plan was straightforward. Mike and Rick would take the attack line and make a push through the back to knock the main body of the fire down. Ben and I were going to pull a second line and protect the exposure, which was a rickety old tool shed way too close to the house. We also had to make sure the fire hadn't jumped into the attic. That's when it started. The feeling, I mean, as I was wrestling with the hose line, dragging the heavy, uncharged canvas off the truck, I felt watched. It's a stupid cliche, I know, but it's a real feeling. The hairs on the back of my neck under my helmet and Nomex hood were standing up. You get a sense for the scene. You're aware of the crackle of the fire, the hiss of your air tank, the shouts of your crew. But there's also the background noise of a night, crickets, the wind, maybe a distant dog. Here, there was nothing. It was dead quiet, except for our noise and the fire. The woods that started about 50 feet from the back of the property were just a wall of blackness. I shook it off. Nerves, adrenaline, the dark. I'd felt it before. Ben and I got the hose laid out, and I gave him the signal to charge it. The line went from a limp snake to a rigid, powerful tube in seconds, and I took the nozzle. Water pressure is a beautiful thing. We started dousing the side of the house, preventing the fire from spreading further into the main structure. The water hitting the hot siding created a huge plume of steam that mixed with the smoke, making it even harder to see. I was sweeping the stream back and forth, my boots sinking a little into the wet, soft earth. The flashing lights from our engine were strobing across the yard and the tree line, painting everything in pulses of red and white. It was during one of those pulses, a bright white sweep from one of the scene lights we'd set up, that I saw it, just inside the tree line. A shape. My brain tried to process it, to file it as a stump, a weird shadow, a trick of the light and the steam, but it was none of those things. It was a figure, a dark, solid figure, standing upright. It was tall, really tall, and it was just there, watching. I froze for a second, my thumb easing off the nozzle button. The stream died down to a trickle. My heart, which was already pounding from the work, suddenly felt like it was trying to hammer its way out of my chest. I stared, squinting through my mask, trying to see through the shifting veils of steam and smoke. Another flash of white light from the engine. This time I saw it clearly. It was covered in hair, not fur, like a bear, but hair, long, shaggy, dark brown or black hair. It was built like a man, but bulkier, way bulkier, with shoulders that seemed impossibly wide. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was too far back in the shadows. But I got the impression of a heavy brow, and I could see the direction it was looking. It was looking right at us, at me. It wasn't an aggressive stance. It wasn't hunching down to charge or anything like that. It was just standing there, still as a statue, observing. It looked curious. That was the freakiest part. It was like we were a TV show it had stumbled upon. "Ben," I said, my voice muffled and weird sounding inside my mask. I couldn't take my eyes off the tree line. "Ben, you see that?" The probie was looking where I was pointing, his head tilted. "See what, Cap, a deer?" Before I could answer, Mike's voice crackled over the radio. "We've got a knock on the main fire, but we've got extension into the eaves. We need more water on the roof line." Right. The job. I forced myself to look away from the trees, back to the house. I lifted the nozzle and opened it up again, directing the stream up towards the roof where Mike had indicated. The water arced up, a powerful jet crashing against the shingles and the gutters. I was doing my job, my hands moving on autopilot, but my entire focus was split. My eyes kept flicking back to that spot in the trees. And then it moved. I was spraying a wide pattern, and some of the overspray from my hose, a fine mist, hit the edge of the tree line. The figure, the thing, took a single, slow step backwards. It wasn't a startled jump. It was a deliberate, almost thoughtful movement, like it was just getting out of the way of the water. It didn't break its gaze. It just shifted its weight and moved deeper into the shadows, still watching. My blood went cold. That single, calm step was more terrifying than any charge. It showed intelligence. It wasn't just a scared animal. It was making a decision. That's when Rick came around the corner of the house. He'd finished his work with Mike and was coming to help us mop up. He was walking across the yard, his own hose line slung over his shoulder, his helmet off now that the immediate danger was over. He was heading right towards the tree line, maybe to get a better angle on the last of the smoldering embers near the tool shed. He didn't see it. He was looking at the house, at the steam rising from the roof, but the thing saw him. As Rick got closer, maybe within 30 feet of the trees, the figure changed. Its head, which had been still, tilted slightly. I saw a glint, maybe from its eyes in the flashing lights, and then, in the space between one red pulse and the next, it was gone. It didn't run. It didn't crash away through the brush. It just vanished. 1 second it was a solid, hulking shape in the shadows, and the next, the space was empty. The woods were just woods again. I stood there, hose in my hand, water pouring onto the ground at my feet. I was just staring at the empty space. My mind was screaming, what the hell was that? What the hell did I just see? Rick walked right past the spot, completely oblivious. "Looks good, man," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "We got it. Another one for the books." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, my throat tight. The fire was out. The chaos was over. The house was a mess, charred and dripping, but it was saved. Mrs. Gable was safe with the neighbors. We started the process of overhaul, pulling down damaged siding, checking for hot spots, coiling the hoses. The whole time I was silent. My eyes kept drifting back to that tree line. Once everything was packed up and the chief had released us, I made an excuse. I told Mike I thought I'd dropped a glove. I grabbed a high-powered flashlight from the engine and walked towards the woods. The ground near the trees was soft. If something that big had been standing there, it would have left tracks. I shone the light where I'd seen it. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating fallen leaves, ferns, a few saplings. Nothing, no footprints, no broken branches, no sign that anything larger than a raccoon had been through there. I walked a little way into the woods, my boots sinking into the leaf litter. The air was still and cold. The only sound was my own breathing and the crunch of my steps. It felt normal, just a quiet woods at night. But it wasn't normal. I knew what I saw. I'm a practical guy. I fix problems. I deal with tangible things. Fire, water, metal, wood. I don't believe in ghosts or monsters. But I couldn't deny the cold, hard knot of fear in my stomach. I couldn't unsee that dark, hairy figure standing there with a quiet curiosity, watching us put out a fire. I stood there for a few minutes, sweeping the light back and forth, hoping to find something, anything, that would make sense of it. A piece of fur caught on a branch, a depression in the soil. There was nothing. It was as if the woods had simply absorbed it. I walked back to the engine, my mind racing. The guys were already in the cab, waiting for me. "Find your glove?" Mike asked. "Nah," I said, climbing in. "Must have left it at the station." We drove back in silence, the lights off now, just a big red truck rolling through the dark country roads. I stared out the window at the passing black shapes of trees. For 20 years, my job was to run towards the chaos, towards the danger that everyone else was running from. I've been in burning buildings. I've dealt with gas leaks, car wrecks with people trapped inside. I've never been scared like that. That wasn't the fear of a known danger. It was the fear of the unknown. The fear of something that shouldn't exist, standing calmly in the dark, just watching. I never reported it. Who would I tell? What would I say? "Hey, Chief, I saw Bigfoot at the Gable fire." I'd be off the truck and into a psych eval before lunch. But I know what I saw. It's been years now, and the memory is as sharp and clear as it was that night. The image is burned into my brain. The way it stood, the way it moved, the way it just disappeared. It changed something in me. It made the world feel bigger and a lot darker. You go through life thinking you have a handle on what's real and what's not. You think the shadows are just shadows. Then you see something that tells you, in no uncertain terms, that you're wrong. That there are things in those shadows, quiet, patient, and deeply, deeply curious about us. And sometimes, on a quiet, dark night, when I'm out on my own porch, I'll catch myself staring into the tree line at the edge of my property, and I'll feel that old, familiar chill, and I wonder if anything is staring back. Story 17. Zali. I lived out in the Washington woods, a good 45-minute drive from the nearest town that had a proper grocery store. My place was a small, rustic cabin my granddad built back in the 60s. It was surrounded by firs and cedars so tall they blocked out the sun by 3 in the afternoon. I loved it out there. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. You could hear every little creak of a branch, every rustle in the undergrowth. You got to know the sounds. That's the important part. You got to know what was normal. It was Halloween. I'd been living out there for about 3 years at that point. I didn't get trick-or-treaters, obviously. The driveway alone was a quarter-mile of rutted dirt off a logging road. But I've always liked the holiday, the fun of it. It felt lonely to just ignore it. So that afternoon, I decided I'd put a pumpkin on the porch and a bowl of candy, just for me. Just for the spirit of the thing. I carved the jack-o'-lantern around 4 o'clock. It was one of those classic lopsided grins with triangle eyes. I remember my fingers were sticky with pumpkin guts, and the smell of that raw, wet orange flesh was sharp in the cold air. I set a tea light inside it and put it on the porch railing right by the front door. Next to it, I placed a big stainless steel mixing bowl heaped with those miniature chocolate bars, Snickers, Milky Ways, the works. I figured maybe the raccoons would get into it overnight, but that was fine. It was the gesture that mattered. I went back inside as the sun started to dip below the tree line. The sky turned this deep, bruised purple, and the woods got dark fast. I made myself some dinner, read a book, did the normal things. I remember glancing out the window a couple of times. The jack-o'-lantern was glowing, this little beacon of warm light in a sea of black. The bowl was still there, full. It must have been around 8 o'clock when I decided to check one last time before I settled in for the night. I flicked on the porch light. The motion sensor light was out there too, a big halogen thing mounted under the eaves that lit up the whole clearing if a deer or even a big owl flew by. I looked out the window. The bowl was gone. Not knocked over, not spilled. Gone. The porch railing was empty except for the jack-o'-lantern, its candle still flickering. My first thought was, okay, a raccoon, a really smart, strong raccoon. But that didn't sit right. The bowl was heavy stainless steel. A raccoon would have had to tip it, scrape it, make a racket. I would have heard something. I'd been sitting in the living room, which shares a wall with the porch. The house was dead quiet. I'd heard nothing. No clatter, no thump, no scratching, nothing. A little knot of unease tightened in my chest. I unlocked the door and stepped out onto the porch. The wood was cold under my socks. The air was biting, the kind of cold that smells like pine and damp earth. I looked down. There were no scratches on the porch boards, no smeared chocolate, no scattered wrappers. It was just clean, as if I'd never put a bowl there at all. I stood there for a full minute just listening. The woods were silent, not just quiet, but a heavy, watchful silence. It was the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. Even the usual rustling had stopped. I remember hugging my arms, the goosebumps rising on my skin. This was wrong. This was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I went back inside and locked the door. I tried to tell myself I was being silly. It was probably just an animal, a clever one. I went back to my book, but I couldn't focus. I kept reading the same paragraph over and over. My ears were straining, trying to pass the silence outside. Then I heard it. It wasn't a twig snap. It was a step. A heavy, distinct, two-footed step on the gravel path that leads from the woods to my porch. Crunch. The sound was so deliberate, so solid. It wasn't the skittering, four-legged gait of a deer or a bear. This was a weight being placed on one foot, then the other, a person's walk, but heavier, much, much heavier. I felt the sound in my bones. My heart just launched into my throat. I froze, my book clenched in my hands. I didn't breathe. I stared at the front door, half expecting the knob to turn. Crunch. Another step. Closer. My eyes darted to the window. The porch light was still on, casting a yellow pool on the wooden boards. But beyond that, where the motion light should have been triggered, was just darkness. The halogen light hadn't come on. It always came on. A squirrel could set it off. Why wasn't it on now? Crunch. It was right at the edge of the porch. I could picture it standing there just beyond the glow of the porch light, in the shadow of the eaves, a massive shape just out of sight. My body was screaming at me to run, to hide, but I was paralyzed. I was a statue in my own living room. I could hear my own blood pulsing in my ears, a frantic whooshing sound, then a different sound, a soft, scraping drag, like something heavy being pulled across the wooden planks of the porch. It stopped right in front of my door, and then nothing. The footsteps didn't retreat. I didn't hear them walk away. The silence rushed back in, thicker and heavier than before. It felt like a physical pressure in the room. I stayed frozen in my chair for what felt like an hour, just listening to that terrible, waiting silence. I was too scared to move, too scared to look out the window. What if it was looking back? Eventually, the fear was outweighed by a crushing need to know. I had to see. I crept to the window beside the door, keeping my body pressed against the wall. I inched my head forward, just enough to see a sliver of the porch. The jack-o'-lantern was still there, its flame guttering, and right in the middle of the porch, directly in front of the door, was the bowl. It was back. My breath hitched. The relief was immediate but short-lived, because it was instantly replaced by a new, colder fear. Why was it back? Who or what had brought it back? I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch with a kitchen knife on the cushion next to me, staring at the door, listening to every tiny sound the old cabin made. Every settling creak was a footstep. Every wind gust was a breath on the window pane. The night stretched on forever. The second the grey light of dawn started to filter through the trees, I felt a small measure of safety. The world was becoming visible again. I waited until it was fully light, until the birds started chirping, before I even thought about going outside. Finally, I unlocked the door and opened it slowly. The cold morning air washed over me. The first thing I saw were the footprints. They started at the tree line and came right up to the edge of the porch. They were huge. I'm not talking about big, I'm talking about huge. I walked over to the closest one, my own boot looking like a child's toy next to it. I knelt down. The print was clear in the soft, damp earth of the flower bed. It was long, really long. I didn't have a tape measure, but I laid my hand down. From the back of the heel to the tip of the toes. It was a good 4 inches longer than my entire hand. Later, when I was brave enough, I measured it properly. 17 inches. 17. The shape was human-like, but broader, and the arch was different. It was a foot, but not a human foot. My eyes traveled from the prints up to the porch. The bowl was sitting there, exactly where I'd seen it from the window. I forced my legs to move, to step up onto the porch. My heart was hammering again. I looked down into the bowl. The candy was all gone, every last wrapper, but the bowl wasn't empty. It was filled with things, a collection, a gift. There was a small pile of animal bones, cleaned white and gleaming in the morning sun. They looked like they were from a rabbit or a raccoon, small and delicate. Nestled among them were thick clumps of fur. It was coarse, dark brown hair, almost black. It wasn't from any deer or bear I'd ever seen. It was too long, too coarse. There were bits of moss and lichen, the kind that grows on the north side of the trees here, and leaves, damp and pressed flat. But what made my stomach lurch, what made the breath stop in my lungs, was the thing lying on top of it all. It was a paw, a dried, desiccated paw. It was big, bigger than a coyote's, with long, curved claws that were dark and looked viciously sharp. The skin was leathery and shriveled, pulled tight over the bones. It was a paw, but it wasn't like any paw I could identify. It was wrong. The proportions were off. It looked almost hand-like. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth. I think I made a sound, a choked-off gasp. This wasn't an animal messing around. This was an exchange. It had taken the candy, the offering, and it had left a token in return. A payment. A message. The intelligence of that act, the sheer, terrifying thought behind it, hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't some mindless beast. This was something that understood ritual, understood giving and taking. It knew I was here. It knew I'd put out the candy. It had taken it, and it had decided to communicate. I looked from the grotesque collection in the bowl to the 17-inch footprints leading back into the deep, dark woods. The feeling that washed over me wasn't just fear. It was a profound, soul-deep horror. I was being watched by something I couldn't comprehend, something that lived in the shadows of the trees just beyond my property, something that was powerful enough to move in complete silence, to disable my lights just by being there, and was smart enough to engage in this bizarre, terrifying barter. I grabbed the bowl, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold it. I didn't want to touch the things inside, but I had to get it away from my door. I dumped the whole contents into a garbage bag, the bones clattering, the paw making a dull thud. I tied the bag shut and threw it in the outside trash can. Then I took the jack-o'-lantern and smashed it on a rock in the yard. I never decorated for Halloween again. I stopped going outside after dark. Every little noise at night would jolt me awake, my body drenched in a cold sweat. I'd lie there, listening, wondering if it was out there, just beyond the tree line, watching my windows. The feeling of being observed never went away. I lasted another 6 months out there, but my peace was shattered. I was a guest in its territory, and we both knew it. I finally packed up and moved to a little house in town where the streetlights glow orange all night and your neighbors are 20 feet away. I thought that was the end of it. But a couple of years later, I ran into the guy who bought my cabin. We got to talking and he mentioned some weird stuff happening. He said his garbage cans kept getting dragged off into the woods, not tipped over but physically carried away. He'd find them dozens of yards into the forest. And he said sometimes, on certain nights, there was a foul smell that would settle around the property, a musky, rotten odor that wasn't like any dead animal he'd ever smelled. He just thought it was bears. I didn't correct him. I just nodded and changed the subject. But I knew. It's still out there. It's still in those Washington forests. And it's why, even now in a well-lit town, I still get a chill down my spine when the wind blows hard at night. And I never ever feel truly alone in the dark. Story 18 Iso. Okay, I'll just say it straight out. I'm writing this because I can't sleep, and I don't think I'll sleep right for a long time. My hands are still a little shaky. I need to get this out, to tell someone who might get it, because talking about it to people around here just gets you a certain kind of look, the she's lost it look. But I know what I saw. I know what we both saw. It was last Friday night. I remember because we'd spent the whole afternoon in town, which is a 30-minute drive from the farm on a good day. We were just getting groceries and some parts for the tractor, nothing exciting. My boyfriend, let's just call him Jay, he was driving his old Ford pickup. I was in the passenger seat, leaning my head against the window, watching the trees blur by. It was that time of evening where the sun is completely gone, but the world isn't fully dark yet. That deep, heavy blue where shapes start to lose their edges. We live way out in rural Kentucky. I mean, way out. Our nearest neighbor is a half-mile down the road, and past their place, it's just woods and hills and hollers for miles. Our family has a small cattle farm, just a dozen head or so. It's quiet, the kind of quiet you can feel in your bones. Most nights, the only sounds are the crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. You get used to it. We were about 2 minutes from the turnoff to our property, just coming up on the long stretch of road that borders the back 40, where our pasture is. The gate to that pasture is a heavy metal thing on a post, and it's got a pretty simple latch. But if it isn't locked, the cows could nudge it open and get out onto the road. It had been my job to lock it when we left earlier. And right there, as we're rolling along, this cold knot just formed in my stomach. A pure, simple thought cut through the tired haze in my head. Did I lock the gate? I replayed leaving in my mind. I saw myself swinging the gate closed. I heard the clang of the metal, but I couldn't for the life of me remember clicking the padlock shut. I must have just hooked it and assumed I'd locked it later. It's a thing I do sometimes, a dumb habit. My heart just sank. "Jay," I said, and my voice sounded thin in the quiet cab. "I don't think I locked the back gate." He just sighed, a tired, long-suffering sound. He didn't get mad. He never does, but I could feel the frustration. It meant turning around, driving back, and it was basically dark now. "You sure?" he asked. "No," I admitted. "That's the problem. I'm not sure at all." So he did a 3-point turn right there in the middle of the empty road, the truck's tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. We headed back the way we came. The plan was for him to just hop out, check the lock, and if it was open, lock it. It would take 30 seconds. To save time, he said I should just pull the truck into the neighbor's driveway that was right across the road from the gate. They were building a new house there, so the driveway was just a wide gravel path leading up to a big mound of dirt where the foundation was gonna go. It was empty, no one around. He pulled the truck into the mouth of that driveway, put it in park, and left it running. "I'll be right back," he said, and he hopped out, jogging across the road. I slid over into the driver's seat, my hands on the warm steering wheel. I remember feeling embarrassed and annoyed at myself. That was the only thing on my mind. Just a low-level, stupid mistake frustration. I watched him disappear into the gloom near the gate. The truck's headlights were off, but the parking lights were on, casting a dim, yellowish glow on the gravel right in front of the hood. I settled in to wait, listening to the low rumble of the engine. That's when the normal night started to peel away. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It's hard to describe, but I'll try. It wasn't a skunk. It wasn't a dead animal. It was musky. Thick, like wet dog, but mixed with something else, something foul and heavy, like old sweat and dirt. It was so strong it seemed to coat the inside of my nose and the back of my throat. I actually wrinkled my nose and looked around, thinking maybe a possum had died nearby or something. But this was different. This smell felt like it was alive. It was a smell that had a presence. I rolled up my window, thinking that would help. It didn't. The smell just seemed to get stronger, seeping into the cab. Then the second thing happened, a growl. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't a coyote. I've heard every animal this land has to offer. This was deeper, lower than anything I'd ever heard. It was a vibration more than a sound, a rumbling that came up from the ground and went right through the floor of the truck and into my spine. It wasn't loud, but it was heavy, full of something I can only call intent. It wasn't a random noise. It felt like a warning. My heart, which had been beating normally, just seized up. All that mild embarrassment about the gate vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp fear. My skin prickled all over, goosebumps rising on my arms. I was staring straight ahead into the darkness of the construction site. The driveway sloped up a little, and about 50 feet in front of me was this huge pile of gravel and dirt, maybe 8 feet tall, that they were using for the build. The growl had seemed to come from right behind that pile. My brain was scrambling for a logical explanation. A bear? We don't have bears around here, not in this county. A big buck? No, impossible. The logic part of my brain was shutting down, overridden by a much older, more primal part that was screaming at me that I was in danger. My eyes were fixed on the side of that gravel pile, and that's when I saw movement. A shift in the shadows. The darkness behind the pile seemed to thicken. Then it stepped out. I didn't see it all at once. It was like my mind refused to process it. First, I saw an arm, a long, thick, powerfully built arm, covered in dark, matted hair. It was leaning on the gravel pile, just like a man would lean against a wall, casual and easy. The hand was huge, with long fingers. Then as my eyes traveled up, I saw the rest of it. It was massive. I mean, just impossibly big. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its shoulders were hunched and broad, and its body was covered in the same dark, shaggy hair. It wasn't standing fully upright. It had a slight crouch, like it was ready to move. But its head was up, and it was looking right at me. Its eyes. God, its eyes. In the faint glow from the truck's parking lights, they didn't look like animal eyes. They were a pale, whitish color, and they reflected the light back at me with a faint, sickly glow. Like a cat's eyes, but bigger and set deep under a heavy, sloping brow. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there, leaning on one arm against the gravel, staring into the truck, into me. The smell was overwhelming now, a physical pressure in the cab. The low growl had stopped, and the silence that replaced it was somehow worse. It was a watching silence. Time just stopped. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't blink. I was frozen solid, my fingers locked on the steering wheel. Every hair on my body was standing straight up. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't wonder. This was pure, undiluted terror, the kind that empties your mind of everything except the need to survive. My body broke before my mind did. A sound ripped out of my throat, a raw, strangled scream that wasn't even a word. J exclamation mark. I didn't think. I just moved. My right hand fumbled for the headlight switch, my fingers slipping on the plastic. I found it and twisted it. The high beams exploded into life. The full force of the light hit the thing square on. For a split second, I saw it perfectly, seared into my vision. The hair wasn't just brown. It was a muddy, dark brown, almost black, and it was clumped in places. The face was flat, with a wide nose and those horrible, glowing eyes that didn't even squint against the sudden brightness. They just kept staring right through the light, right into me. It didn't snarl, it didn't roar. Its expression was, I don't know. It was calm. It was intelligent. That was the most terrifying part. It wasn't just a wild animal. It was looking at me, studying me. Then I was throwing the truck into reverse and stomping on the gas. The tires spun in the gravel, spitting rocks, and the truck lurched backward onto the road. I didn't look where I was going. I just stared into the rearview mirror, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break. Jay was running across the road, his face a mask of confusion and alarm. "What? What is it?" he was yelling. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt sideways in the road. He yanked the passenger door open and jumped in. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he shouted. I couldn't form words. I just pointed a trembling finger toward the construction site, my eyes wide, still fixed on the spot where it had been. There, behind the gravel. Something was there. He looked where I was pointing. The high beams were still on, lighting up the whole area. The gravel pile was there, but the thing was gone. It had just vanished. Jay squinted, then his eyes got wide. "Holy shit," he whispered. He wasn't looking at the gravel pile anymore. He was looking past it, down the road behind us. I turned to look. Something was moving in the trees at the edge of the road, about 100 yards back. Something big and dark, keeping pace with the tree line. It was running, not on all fours, but upright, with a powerful, loping gait that covered ground terrifyingly fast. It was just a massive, dark shape, a moving shadow, but you could see its size compared to the trees. It was huge. "Go! Just go!" Jay yelled. I didn't need telling twice. I slammed the truck into drive and stomped on the accelerator. The engine roared and we shot forward down the dark road. I was driving too fast, my knuckles white on the wheel, my eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror. Jay was twisted in his seat, staring out the back window. "It's gone," he said after a minute, his voice shaky. "It just disappeared into the woods." We didn't speak the rest of the way home. The silence in the cab was thick and heavy. I could still smell that foul, musky odor clinging to my clothes, my hair. When we got to the house, we both practically fell out of the truck and ran inside, locking the door behind us. We didn't turn on any lights. We just stood in the dark living room, listening, our hearts pounding in unison. The next morning, in the harsh, clear light of day, it felt like a bad dream, but the memory was too sharp, too real. Jay was quiet through breakfast. Finally, he looked at me and said, "We need to go back." I didn't want to. God, I didn't want to. But I knew we had to. We had to know. We drove back to the spot, his stepdad coming with us in his own truck. The three of us stood there in the neighbor's driveway. The gravel pile looked so ordinary in the sunlight. We walked over to where the thing had been standing, and there they were. In the soft, damp dirt right behind the gravel pile, pressed deep into the ground, was a single footprint. It was enormous, longer than my forearm and wide. The shape was human-like, but the toes were long, and they splayed out. The impression was so deep you could see the texture of the skin, the lines and ridges. It wasn't a bear track. Bears have claws, and their prints are different. This was a foot, a bipedal foot. Jay's stepdad, a man who's lived in these hills his whole life and isn't prone to flights of fancy, just whistled low and long. "Good Lord," was all he said. He took out his phone and took pictures. We looked around and found a few more, leading off toward the woods. They were spaced far apart, confirming the long running strides Jay had seen. We went back to Jay's parents' house. His mom was in the kitchen. She took one look at our faces and knew something was wrong. "What happened to you two last night?" she asked. "You came in here like you'd seen a ghost." Jay just shook his head, not knowing where to start. I was standing there feeling hollowed out, the image of those glowing eyes burned onto the back of my eyelids. His mom looked from him to me, her expression growing more serious. "Was it real?" she asked me, her voice low. I didn't have any words left. My throat was tight. All I could do was look back at her, the terror of that night rising up in my chest again, fresh and sharp. I just nodded. Story 19. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out there. I'm a state park ranger, been one for years, and I've seen a lot of weird stuff out in the woods, mostly just animals acting strange or hikers getting lost, but nothing like what happened that day. It was January 2015, up in Aroostook County, northern Maine. I remember it was one of those brutally cold mornings where the air feels like it's cutting right through you, and the snow crunches under your boots like broken glass. I was on my usual patrol route in this remote section of the park, the kind of place where you don't see another soul for days, and the silence is so heavy it almost feels alive. I started out at dawn, just as the sun was beginning to bleed light over the horizon. The sky was this pale, washed-out grey, and the trees were weighed down with frost. I was driving my truck slowly along the dirt road that skirts this big, frozen pond. It's usually iced over solid by then, and that morning it was like a sheet of glass, reflecting the weak morning light. I had the heater cranked up, but I could still feel the cold seeping in through the windows. My breath was making little clouds in the cab, and I was just going through the motions, checking for any signs of trouble, like fallen trees or illegal activity, but mostly it was dead quiet. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a shadow, or maybe a trick of the light, but as I squinted, I realized there was something moving out on the pond. It was far off, maybe a couple hundred yards away, but even from that distance, I could tell it was huge. I grabbed my binoculars from the passenger seat. My hands were a bit numb from the cold, so I fumbled with them for a second before getting them steady. When I focused in, my heart just dropped. It was this massive dark figure, way taller than any man I've ever seen, and it was walking upright across the ice. I'd guess it was over 8 feet tall, easy. Its body was covered in shaggy dark hair that stirred in the wind, like it was being ruffled by some unseen hand. The way it moved was so steady, so confident. It had this bipedal gait that was smooth and purposeful, not like a bear or anything else I've encountered. Bears can stand up, but they wobble. This thing didn't. It just strode across that frozen pond like it owned the place. I kept the binoculars glued to my eyes, my knuckles white from gripping them so tight. I could see its footprints forming behind it in the snow, deep, clear impressions that looked way bigger than any animal track I've ever come across. Later, when I measured them, they were about 16 inches long, but at that moment all I could think was how deep they sank into the snow, like whatever this was weighed a ton. The stride was huge too. I'd estimate about 4.5 feet between steps, and there was no slipping or sliding, even on the ice. It was like it had perfect balance, which just added to the creep factor. The wind was blowing, and I could see its hair shifting, but the creature itself didn't seem affected by the cold or the terrain. It just kept moving, steady as a clock ticking. Then I noticed the steam, little puffs of breath or something rising from it in the frigid air. That's when it hit me. This was alive, and it was breathing. My mind raced through all the possibilities. Could it be a moose? No, moose don't walk like that, and they're not that tall. A bear? Definitely not. Bears don't move that smoothly on 2 legs, and they're bulkier. This thing was leaner in a way, but still massive, with broad shoulders and long arms that swung naturally as it walked. I felt this chill run down my spine, not from the cold, but from pure awe and fear. I've been in the woods my whole life. I know the animals around here. This wasn't one of them. It must have taken a minute or two to cross the pond. but it felt like an eternity. I was frozen in my seat, just watching, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I remember thinking, is this really happening? Because it was so surreal. The creature didn't make a sound. No cracking ice, no heavy footsteps echoing, nothing. It was eerily silent, like it was part of the landscape. When it reached the other side, it stepped off the ice and into the spruce trees without even breaking stride. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone, swallowed up by the dark woods. No rustling branches, no noise, just vanished. I sat there for what felt like ages, my hands shaking before I finally snapped out of it. I had to go check this out. I turned off the truck, grabbed my gear, camera, measuring tape, notepad, and started walking toward the pond. The snow was deep, up to my knees in places, and every step was the effort. The cold bit at my face, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was what I'd just seen. When I reached the edge of the pond, I stopped and looked out across the ice. The footprints were there, clear as day, leading from where I'd seen it start to where it disappeared into the trees. I stepped onto the ice carefully. It was solid, no risk of breaking through, and followed the tracks. Up close, they were even more impressive. Each print was deep and well-defined, with a shape that wasn't quite human. The toes were broad, and the heel was deep, like it had a lot of weight behind it. I got down on my knees, ignoring the cold seeping through my pants, and measured one with my tape. 16 inches long, like I thought. The stride was consistent, about 4.5 feet, and there was no sign of slipping or dragging, which was weird because the ice was slick. It was like it had claws or something that gripped perfectly. I followed the tracks to the tree line, and that's where things got even stranger. The snow was disturbed around the base of some spruce trees, and I saw where branches had been broken off, not snapped randomly, but almost deliberately, like something big had pushed through. The broken ends were fresh, oozing sap that had frozen in the cold, and then I smelled it, this musky, earthy odor, like wet fur and dirt, but stronger than any animal I've ever encountered. It hung in the air, thick and pungent, and it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I've smelled bears before, and this was different, more primal, if that makes sense. I spent the next couple of hours documenting everything. I took photos of the footprints, the broken trees, even the spot where it had entered the woods. My hands were trembling the whole time, and I had to keep wiping my nose because it was running from the cold. I remember feeling this mix of excitement and dread, like I'd stumbled onto something huge, but also something that scared the hell out of me. At one point, I found a rock near the tree line that had been displaced. It was about 100 pounds, and it was sitting in a patch of disturbed snow, like it had been moved recently. I tried to lift it, but it was too heavy for me to budge easily. Whatever moved it had to be incredibly strong. As I worked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those dark eyes staring back at me from the trees. The woods felt different now, heavier, more watchful. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was oppressive. I finished up my notes and headed back to the truck, my mind racing. I drove straight to the ranger station, my heart still thumping. When I got there, I showed the photos and my measurements to a couple of colleagues. I was breathless, trying to explain what I'd seen, but they just laughed it off. One guy said it was probably a moose with frost on its back, or maybe a bear that had gotten lost. Another joked that I'd been out in the cold too long. They didn't get it. They hadn't seen the way it moved, the sheer size of it, the silence. They hadn't smelled that musky odor or seen those perfect deep footprints. I tried to argue, but eventually I just shut up. What could I say? There was no proof beyond my word and some photos that could be explained away. So I filed my report, but it got buried in the paperwork, and life went on. But I didn't. That day changed me. I still patrol the same area, and every time I'm out there, I can't help but feel a knot in my stomach. I look at those woods differently now, like they're hiding something ancient and unknowable. I never saw the creature again, and part of me is glad, but another part wonders, what was it? Where did it go? I'll probably never have answers, but that sighting is burned into my memory, clear as if it happened yesterday. And sometimes, when the wind howls through the spruce trees, I swear I can almost smell that musky odor again, and I get this chill that has nothing to do with the cold.